Okay.
Only going to be a little bit on hiatus because of the film festival, but we're under pressure.
Okay. All right, we will get started with the council meeting then. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. We'll call the meeting to order. The invocation this evening is by Pastor Ed Bruning from Savior Lutheran Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor Bruning.
Our heads in prayer. Almighty God, creator of life, fountain of wisdom and grace, you have honored us tremendously by creating us, as you've said in the Bible, Lord, in your image, that we might be able to carry forth some of the qualities, some of the excellencies that are you. We notice in the New Hampshire presidential primary that over 30 candidates offered their names as servants and received votes as such. Many will not be noticed, but Lord, we do want to notice the excellencies of those who were willing and ready to offer their ideas, their encouragement, their strength, and their virtues in the operation of civil government. We thank you and we ask your blessings upon the council tonight, who have each done just that. They have offered themselves as servants to you, that we might be a better place, that we might be better people, that we might have truly a home that attracts and supports even more than those who are already here. Continue, Lord, giving us that wisdom from which you so richly provide, and continue giving us the patience and the perseverance to accept your will and your ways. We thank and we praise you. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Pastor Bruning. Public announcements. Mr. City Manager.
Honorable Mayor and Council, it's my pleasure from time to time to come up and help to celebrate, memorialize very special days throughout the year. And as you know, it has become now a habit to celebrate a special birthday. And tonight, if the audience, as well as the rest of the staff and council, will join me in wishing Councilwoman Judy Hoskins a happy birthday on 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Judy. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you all so very much. And most people don't tell their age. I love to tell my age. I'll be 81 next week.
Of course, I'm a little concerned we don't have the firefighters here tonight for the candle duty, but okay. Continuing on with public announcements, Svetlana Stevanova. I think she was out in the hall.
Thank you. My name is Svetlana Stefanova. I'm the executive director of the Damn Short Film Festival, which is coming up on starting Thursday, the 13th, and it's going all the way through Monday, the 17th. It's going to be the 16th annual film festival that we've had, and it is actually Nevada's largest film festival and one of the top 100 best reviewed film festivals in the world. And yeah, we've already sold out of, I think, both of our comedy programs, so make sure to purchase your tickets ahead of time. We have 25 different programs. There's anywhere from 4 to 12 short films. We're screening 146 films this year from all over the world. We had over 1,028 submissions exactly, and we have filmmakers from all over coming to present their work to an audience, and it's really a beautiful event to share art and community, and we get to utilize the beautiful Boulder Theater, which is our historic 400-seat theater right in downtown Boulder City. Tickets are $10 per program, and yeah, just go to damnshortfilm.org, and you'll be able to look at every program, look at every film in the program, and you can order tickets online there, or come to our office in the Boulder Dam Hotel during office hours, which are 2:30 to 4:30 every day until the festival. And yeah, just go to damnshortfilm.org if you have any questions. There's contact and our phone number as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to the event. Joseph McLeod or Michael McLeod, was there something you would like to speak about? Okay. Do we have any other fourth graders? I know we had one come up earlier for their Nevada citizenship. Any others? All right, then. We will move to our first public comment period. This comment period is for items on the agenda. The time period is up to 5 minutes for each speaker. Again, we do ask people be civil and concise in their comments. We will be having a public hearing regarding the zoning matter of the Reflection Park Center. At that time, there will also be an opportunity for people to speak. But I will go ahead and open the initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak in public comment? Mr. Sinayakan?
I'm Neil Sinayakan. I'm really glad that this council has taken the initiative to correct the zoning on the filtration plant. It's been an error for years and years since the 2003 master plan. In 2003, the master plan was changed to make that public use. The C1 zoning wasn't corrected. Throughout that area, there inappropriately was C1 zoning. Half of Ash Street was zoned commercial. That was inappropriate. I believe it was Frank Crow Park that was zoned commercial. That was inappropriate. There were pocket parks throughout Birch, Cherry, and Ash, and all of that was corrected because it didn't belong in the C1 zone. This property wasn't corrected. The property is used as a park, and it matches the master plan. The C1 zoning doesn't match that. With zoning, the C1 takes precedent over the master plan. So if someone made an application under the zoning, that C1 zoning supersedes the use. If the city goes ahead and corrects it as they should, the considerations are, is it in compliance with the master plan? And does it promote the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Boulder City? Due to the zoning and the use, and due to it being approximate to a residential area, all of that is consistent with the zone change. It also goes along with the 2020 strategic plan. It also goes along with your impetus on historic preservation, and I see no reason to not go ahead and correct that zoning. It should have been done at the time of the 2003 master plan to make it consistent with the use and that master plan. It's also good in terms of setting a goal. There's money available. I talked to Kristen Brown in the State Historic Preservation Office. If it goes toward preservation, there's a lot of money that would be available. It encourages anybody that wants to make a donation, like Cooper Roofing did, where they donated a roof. They didn't donate the roof for it to be made into a commercial use. They donated the roof toward it being a public use. And if the city goes ahead with its current direction to make that a public use, then other people will come forward and people may be more inclined to go forward with donations and support rather than it sending a mixed message with the improper C1 zoning. So for all of those reasons, I see no reason to not go ahead and change this. Everything is in line. The decision of the Planning Commission, as I spoke about at the last meeting, should be set aside. It wasn't in conformance with the two goals that are stated in the package. They made no finding of facts. They deferred from the plan by talking about future use, which wasn't part of the agenda item. And there were misinstructions given by staff. So with all of that, I would encourage you to go ahead and fix the zoning after all of this time because it serves all of those purposes. It was asked at that meeting for costs of what it costs to hold that building, and that wasn't provided by staff. I asked the finance director for cost information and for projection and budget information, and I got an email back from the city clerk and the finance director that the finance department doesn't keep track of costs and projections on public buildings. I find that really disconcerting that you have no records of what the costs are to keep track of public buildings, and there's no projections on what costs will be for the future. I don't think that's in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and it's of great concern. Also, I have concern that that building is properly protected, that there might be an alarm system, that there's floodlights that are triggered at least by motion that wouldn't hurt the area but still provide more protection from vandalism. So based on everything, I see no reason why the council shouldn't go ahead with what you've wisely started and change the zoning to match the use in the master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. My name is Jeff Andrews. I live on Fairway Drive here in Boulder City. I noticed that agenda item 4 is going to talk about reclassification of the city ordinances. And there is a greater problem that I want to bring the council's attention to, and that is there's a developing polarization within the community on the issue of on-street parking of properly licensed and registered trailers, RVs, boats, motorhomes, etc. The police department has received complaints from a citizen or citizens, and they're in the process of distributing warning notices and vehicle impound notices, issuing warning, I'll call it a citation, but it's not an actual citation, as well as citing and towing and impounding vehicles. In the agenda packet that you had earlier in January for a meeting, there was a staff report dated January 14th, 2020, and it said during the recodification process, there's no substantive changes allowed. The information sheet distributed by the police department references a particular Nevada statute as well as municipal code under the old number 10-6-3. In the packet that council members routinely receive, kind of giving you a heads up as to what's contained in your workload of the evening. For this, I believe this is for this evening's meeting. It's staff notes on 10-6-3. The title is Parking Over 24 Hours. Updated current 24 hours parking ordinance to clear up previous ambiguous language and eliminate the ability to park vehicles, etc., on roadways for week/month/years. See draft page 12. Well, I would agree that the ordinance is a mess and does have ambiguous language. And if you're going to determine one path versus another, that in itself is a substantive change, and I would hope that the council is astute enough not to step in that landmine. What I want to leave with is a request that among council members, one of you or more may be receptive enough to put this larger issue on an agenda for open discussion and for action so that we can implement some sort of mechanism to solicit input from the community, determine what the consensus is, and then implement that consensus. And if it's 51% says yes and 49% says no, that's the way democracy works. So that's my request to you this evening. Also, I am representing a particular client in the municipal court that was cited, and Judge Miller informed me that there are several others that we're going to try to consolidate and address that through judicial means, as well as what we can accomplish here through political means. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment?
My name is Frances Meyer, and I live at 301 Ash Street, directly across the street from Reflection Park, and I just want to speak in support of that being made officially a park. I've owned that house since 1976 and was there when it was being built and always thought that it was a park. And I think it is very important to the community to have that as a park and to have the filtration plant, which is a beautiful building, in there and used for public use. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Mary Ann Ray, and I live at 1408 Denver Street. I also look down on Reflection Park and that old filtration building, and I'm like all of the neighbors there, we have been very frustrated because we have been through this process about keeping that not having it for private use. I do not know how many times we have heard that someone was trying to buy it for a private residence, or if they were going to put in a business of some kind. And I too would urge that please change the rezoning on that. It should not be commercial at all. It should be a government thing for people to enjoy. I watch people all the time come to that Reflection Park. They sit on the bench, they enjoy it. It is something that everyone in this city should be able to enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Jack Howard. I reside on Robinson, Boulder City. I've resided here about 30 some years. With regard to the filtration plant rezoning, I am an attorney. I don't represent any parties in this matter. But I was a city attorney in Las Vegas for a number of years. And prior to the meeting, I asked Mr. Morris, who I respect immensely, my work with the city attorney, we were trying to turn a park into a commercial zoning. And we had to jump through a lot of hoops to get that done. And I believe we had to get voter approval ultimately. My concern is when you turn a commercial property into a park and you decide later that you've made a mistake and you want to, in future, turn the park into commercial, I think it's a higher standard, Mr. Mayor and Council. And I would be more comfortable if the council would ask for a legal opinion how that would be accomplished before voting here this evening. So I don't take a position whether it's better to be commercial or park. I'm just concerned with, once it's done, how we in the future change that. And so thank you for the time.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Fan? Oh, sorry. Ms. Collins, please. I thought you were looking for a seat.
No, my name's Nikki Collins, a resident, and I'm just here to support the rezoning and protection of Boulder City's most iconic building. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Fan.
My name is Glenn Fan. Good evening again. I'm also going to talk about the water filtration plant. I spoke at the last meeting about why I think it should be a park, and I still think of that. But I also want to address some of the stuff that's going on. People that said that they don't want to change it have indicated that they do want to change it in past history. Now they're saying that it's going to cost the city, it would cost the city $1 million to renovate the building, or it would cost a private developer $1 million to renovate it to be usable. I didn't know that at any time that anybody was allowed in there to go in there and check it out and make sure that, yeah, we can do this, this, and this. I don't think anybody from the city has gone in there and had somebody come in and say it's going to cost you this much to do this. So I think some people are blowing some smoke up people's ass. I caught myself.
Careful.
I caught myself. So I think people are blowing smoke up that it's going to cost $1 million to do this and $1 million to that. I think those numbers are being picked out of the air. So I'm going to pick a number out of the air. I'd be willing to, I would think that on maybe $250,000, that building could be turned into a really nice visitor center, information center, small museum about the filtration plant. I mean, if people can pick numbers out of the air, so can I. But I think my number is probably a little bit more realistic. It'd probably be done for even less than that with a lot of volunteer work and stuff. And the previous gentleman was concerned about, well, if we change it from C1 to park, well, then what if we have to do it again, change from park back to C1? Well, the real simple solution to that is don't. Make it a park, leave it a park. It's been considered a park for how many decades? How long has Reflection Park been there? Money was donated to make it a park. It's been treated as a park. We've got the gardens there. Well, most of the time I think of a park, if you think of gardens, you think of flowers and plants as part of a park. Historic building. Well, yeah, historic buildings are kind of cool in parks. We've all been to many places, around the country where there's parks. Yellowstone, the Lodge. That's a big, huge building. It's a historic building. Limited things can be done with it, but that's right in the middle of a park. So keeping the water filtration plant building as a building in a park, I think is a way to do for the city. It's going to be good for the city. I think the residents of the city would get around if the city made it a park and they want to do some things with the building. I believe the residents would get behind that, would donate money, donate time and labor to make it a grand building again. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Ms. DeShane?
I took his chair.
Well, are you going to give it back?
He speaks pretty good. Yeah, I'll give it back.
Thank you.
My name is Ronald Bruno Bordigioni, and a couple of years ago, the Boulder Dam Film Festival, the winner of that production was a film called Halt the Salt, and you can see it on YouTube. It's concerning the destruction of Mount Charleston. Boulder City right here, we straddle two of the most beautiful and unique areas in the world. The lake and the river. I'm a volunteer boat captain / deckhand for water safety, assisting rangers with search and rescue, and I'm intimate with that lake. I've done it for 8 years. The Spring Mountains up here, they're called the Spring Mountains because there's springs everywhere. You dig a hole, you put a hose in it and let the water run for a little bit, and it just keeps going into the ground. They're killing our trees. And the aquifer, they're putting tons and tons of salt on the roads. And
Sir, which item are you speaking on?
what made me come down here, I just read the article about the water filtration plant,
Okay.
which has to do with water filtration. But when you come across the bridge and stuff, it's like a perfect building. This man here was talking about like a reception area, keep it a park. I mean, you could put a nice sign up there, halt to salt, help protecting the area. You don't protect it, it's gonna be gone. It's gonna like be a domino effect. Before you know it, you're gonna lose all the greenery. I mean, that place is for hikers. Every hiker, every bicyclist, every motorcyclist, every person that takes a car, a truck, an RV, and even if you don't use it, you know it's up there. It's something that you're going to frickin' lose if you don't do something about it. Yes, this is a little bit different than what the subject matter at hand is that you're expecting to be talking about, but that building is perfect for a sign, for to help save something that if you don't save it now, and people, they just started, we were using sand, and like a little less than 20 years ago, they switched this stuff when new people came in, and they owned the roads. And these attorneys that are protecting the thing, it's like totally corrupt. And I help finance Halt to Salt, and I've had disputes up there, and the Clark County Commissioner, Larry Brown, he won't do a frickin' thing because he was an employee of the attorney that owned Area 51s. Now he got out of owning them, but it belongs to everybody, everybody. And I just hope you realize what's in your frickin' backyard. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Mr. Turner?
Mayor, Council, I'm not here to argue the highest and best use of the water treatment building. I'm here to argue who should be making that decision. We've heard from a number of people that would prefer it be a park. I have a petition that I scanned and sent to council earlier with several hundred people that disagree with that decision. Planning Commission voted against the rezoning. The Stantec study suggested repurposing the building. Among the signatures in this petition, there are 28 business owners who disagree with your decision. One of the signatures in this petition is a man who's been in business in Boulder City for over 30 years. And I believe that the voices in this petition hold weight and that they should be considered. I challenge the mayor and the council that the people on this side of the podium should be making that decision, and that after 37 years, the residents of Boulder City should be allowed to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Mrs. Barnett?
Linda Barnett. I've spoken on this quite a bit, so I'm not going to bore you with what a gem the water filtration is. But I must say that it's a waste of our time to think that the people who voted in the last election for historic preservation and put this council on wouldn't vote again to keep this town historic and save the water filtration plant. It's a waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Phone calls excluded. Mrs. Booth?
Koki Booth, Boulder City residents. I just want to say that I support what Grant is saying because I've seen that building for a long time. I think it's a beautiful building, and it's kind of sad how it's just kind of nobody's ever taken care of it, nobody's ever cared about it, and then we all get all riled up and talk about it, but nobody ever does anything. It's been a park since Teddy Fitton wanted it to be a park, and she lobbied to get that. So it's been a park, I think, about 20 years. And there's no restroom. You've got community gardens there, and you've got the park there, but there's no restroom. And just to build your restrooms, and I think you've had that happen before. I think we spend about $200,000 on the restrooms that we have here. So you're looking at right around $300,000. Nobody ever donates anything towards this building. Nobody ever has cared enough to start
Please let the speaker speak, folks.
And
Thank you.
I think that's sad that we don't allow the speakers to speak and we get after them. But nobody's ever cared to really get a group going to support that building. And I think that we should let the citizens decide and maybe find out if there's a better way to repurpose that building and hang on to it for a longer time, because you could have community gardens and a wedding venue there at the same time, because gardens don't have to be in square boxes. They could be beautiful gardens, and you can still have a park, and you could have a business there, or have a Chamber of Commerce or something like that in that building. But somebody's got to come up with a plan, and I think if you got more of the community's input on that and how to do it, and find out if people are willing to save the building like they did the hotel, because nobody has shown any desire to come up with a way to start saving that filtration plant. And I don't think there's enough grants out there. I know the hotel has struggled trying to get grants. I don't think there's enough grants out there. So I think we need to have more conversation on how can we keep that building alive and not let it just fall apart around its ears. And how are you going to get a restroom out there if you want a park out there? So I think there's a lot of questions that haven't been answered to all of a sudden just change something. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Mrs. Simpson?
My name is Cynthia Simpson. I live on Ash Street. I have a plot at the garden. I've been there for, I think, 8 years. But my first visit to Boulder City, about 3 years before that, I found the gardens, and I thought they were really special. Once you designate it as a park, the community will come together and find the money to do what's needed, including put bathrooms in. And yes, we do need bathrooms there, because if you've been at the garden for an hour working, you got to go home and then come back. But a lot of people use it. They stroll their babies through there. They walk their dogs through there. It's a beautiful spot. It hasn't been taken care of, but it hasn't been in the city's care very long. It was federal until maybe 10 years ago or less. So what are you talking, 30 years of no care? It wasn't ours yet. Make it a park, make it ours, and the community will come together and do what you need to do.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Turner?
Good evening. I'm Ray Turner. I'm a member of the Boulder City History and Arts Foundation, and I'm sure many of the people in this room are very familiar with the efforts that we have undertaken over the last 4 years or so to bring attention to the water filtration plant, to advertise its existence to the community by putting on tours of the building, which we've done at least once a year and sometimes twice a year, to show people the wonderful interior of the building. If you think the outside is nice, you need to see the inside of it, because nobody talks about the inside of it. And it's an amazing, amazing building inside, and especially on the underground handicap access is no problem. There is a bathroom there inside the building, and I know because I've cleaned it on my hands and knees. I've washed it. I've watched every inch of that ground level with other volunteers, and that happened 4 years ago that we did that. So we've had a whole series of events, meetings, tons of meetings with the community to ask them what they think about the building, its future. We've lobbied the council, past councils, we've lobbied them constantly. And it's really disturbing when you see a member of the Planning Commission, past member of the Planning Commission, telling you that nothing has been done and nobody's donated any money. Well, a generous resident in 2018 donated a $50,000 brand new, fully restored roof to the building, which is probably the biggest expense that you're going to have in the restoration of that building. On the interior, a contractor was paid to remove the graffiti that was all on the inside of the building. That's gone now. You know, the city paid for that. You know, thank you, city, for doing that. And I don't think they would have done it if it hadn't have been for the efforts of the Boulder City History and Arts Foundation drawing attention to the building, because I think it would just be sitting there completely neglected, as it has been by past councils. And again, it's just disturbing to see somebody from the Planning Commission suggest that nothing is being done, nobody cares, nobody spent any money. Where was this Planning Commission member for the last 5 years? You know, they must have been asleep at the wheel. And I think that's the problem with our town. We have people like that on our Planning Commission that aren't really involved. They're not watching. They don't know what's going on in the town, you know, and they should be more knowledgeable. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? All right, we'll go ahead then and close public comment. We'll move to our first item on the agenda, or excuse me, we'll move to the approval of the regular agenda. Madam City Clerk, Mr. City Manager.
No changes.
Mr. City Attorney.
No changes.
Okay. Bring it back to council. Any questions? Okay. Move for approval.
I'll move to approve the regular agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll move to the approval of the consent agenda. Madam City Clerk.
Mayor, I'm requesting that the council move item number 2 to the regular agenda, please.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager.
No additional changes.
Mr. City Attorney.
No further changes.
Bring it back to council then. Any questions or comments?
I just want to clarify here real quick. If we move this item number 2 to the regular agenda, I can vote to approve of the consent agenda and then recuse myself when we get to it on the regular agenda.
That is correct.
And with that, we'll entertain a motion then for approval of the consent agenda with changes.
Move to approve the consent agenda with changes.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, item number 1 is the approval of the minutes for both the January 23rd, 2020 City Council Workshop and the January 28th, 2020 regular City Council meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. See, you move stuff around on the consent agenda, you confuse me. Well, then we'll move to item 2 then. Okay, for possible action, resolution number 7067, resolution of City Council authorizing disbursement of RDA funds for eligible activities approved under RDA Resolution 220, which we did earlier this evening for property located at 1129. Councilman Adams.
Yes, Mayor. At this time, I will recuse myself as one of the applicants is the employer of my fiance, so I will recuse myself.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council members?
I don't want to step on Michael's toes, but the purpose for pulling it off would be to amend it on the floor because the resolution granted the 30% reimbursement. And due to the action taken by the RDA board, we just need to amend the resolution on the floor from the amount that it's stated in the resolution to
25%.
25%, which is $24,596.25.
And I will make the motion then to amend the resolution to the aforementioned figure, which is 25% of the amount requested by the applicant in total. Mr. Mays, any questions or comments?
Nothing further.
Thank you. I'll entertain a second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll move then to item number 3. Matters pertaining to the rezoning of the historic water filtration plant block. This is a public hearing. Mr. Mays.
Good evening. Michael Mays, your Community Development Director. And if I could put on the screen a map that references the subject property. Thank you. City owns property located at 300 Railroad Avenue that includes the old water filtration plant, the community gardens, and the Teddy Fenton Memorial Park. Section 1133.2 of the City Code permits that the City Council be able to initiate rezoning for any parcel within the community. The City Council on December 10th of 2019 voted 5-0 to begin the process for rezoning 300 Railroad Avenue from C1 Neighborhood Commercial to GP Government Park. This property in the master plan is designated for parks and recreational purposes. A public hearing was held on January 15, 2020 before the Planning Commission. A copy of those minutes, which are included in your packet, which includes the public input provided at that meeting. The commission recommended 4-2 against rezoning. So for council action this evening is first to hold a public hearing regarding the potential rezoning, and then to consider Bill number 1868 that would rezone the property to Government Park GP. And as a reminder, with any motion made on Bill number 1868, for the council to address the finding as identified in Section 2 of the bill. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council?
Not at this point.
Nope, not at this time.
All right, I guess I will kick it off then. So when reviewing the Planning Commission meeting, it seemed that one of the major concerns that the Planning Commission at least had stated was that the fear that any change to the zoning would then preclude any type of repurposing or restoration or preservation of that building. Is that an accurate assessment? It depends on what the ultimate use would be. Okay, so because there was kind of the feeling that a number of people had said that, they could see it as part of a parking museum or an art center or all these other spaces. Is park, or let me start here. The definition of our zoning for GP, it defines it pretty exclusively as being exclusive for park and recreation purposes. Is that correct? Correct.
So it's a narrow intent, but kind of broad for interpretation, I guess, as to what park is. Is there a definition for park in the zoning code?
There are definitions for recreation, but not for park specifically.
What is the definition for recreation? Do you have that on you by any chance? Always prepared.
This is why I keep the zoning ordinance with me.
Not at all times, right?
He's got the pocket
version, yeah.
So we have several definitions, including public use, a use operated exclusively for a public body, for the purpose of serving the public health, safety, and welfare.
recreational, private, non-commercial clubs or recreational facilities operated by a nonprofit. We also have recreational commercial, quasi-public use, but we do not have a park definition within the code.
And so how do we arrive then to come to a definition if that word is not then defined? I don't know, maybe that's a question for the city council or for city attorney?
It's just the ordinary meaning rule. You assign the common meaning to the term.
Merriam-Webster's dictionary has park defined as an area devoted to a specified purpose. So again, kind of broad. So I looked to our master plan to kind of seek guidance. It is our principal guiding document where the charter, sets the rules of the roads for us to follow. The master plan sets it helps direct us in our policy and our direction. In there, it references that our parks should follow the standards and guidelines for the National Park Service. When looking at that, appropriate uses at parks they see as I had it written down right here. We have, it does note that we should have variances for our desert landscape, so not everything. But it does note that appropriate uses include cultural centers, museums, visitor contact, interpretation functions, historic references. So could we not assume then that those uses could also be permitted in a government park setting?
Well, the past practice has been when it's ambiguous, it's appropriate to do a text amendment to further clarify. And certainly in the zoning ordinance, and what we try to tell the public is if it's not explicitly listed, then it's not permitted. And so the opportunity is always there to further refine that through a text amendment.
So then what is then allowed, I guess, and since, as you said, it's just listed as parks and recreation, what is that? I mean, that seems to be the thing that we're all trying to circle around, because I think everybody has spoken in interest of preservation of the building, of restoration of the building. Once we get to repurposing, the ways in which we do that, but what fits that? Where, if it's not listed there as specifically saying cultural center, but we have an art center at one of our government parks, we're considering leasing one building to lend a hand. I'm not sure if that falls under parks and recreation. It seems that we have a number of different functions at different parks, but they're not specifically listed. So how do we arrive to that?
Ultimately, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So as proposed uses are considered, we're going to look at how that is generally interpreted, whether that would be a permitted use or not. The other considerations are, is it a permanent use or a temporary use? We have many examples within the community where temporary activities occur within our parks. Those temporary activities may not align exactly with a park, but it is temporary and not a permanent use. So ultimately, to answer the question, it will be a determination of the proposed use of the filtration plan and how that fits in with the zoning ordinance.
Thank you. That'll be all at this time.
Councilwoman Bridges?
Yeah, one of the interesting things I looked up, and I think it sort of goes alongside Councilman Adams' comment, that I looked up under the National Park Service and what they allowed, and it talked about National Parks are Institute of Museum and Library Services, National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, announced a $12.6 million in Save America's Treasures grant. So it does seem like, in the event that this building was to be used in a park setting, that there's a precedent on a national level of using parks, raising funds that are available through the government in order to support these treasures. And obviously this building is a treasure. That there are grants available, that was part of the reason why we even looked at the CLG, the Certified Local Government, that we could go and get grant money for certain objects, for certain improvements. So I think it's very important to realize that there are ways to fund improvements in the building. And also we had the conversation before that we could make a text amendment to the definition of government park and say that it could include a museum, a cultural arts center, and so on, correct?
Correct.
And that would be a decision by the city council. What would be the process of doing that? I'm curious.
It would require an application. Even with applications that are initiated by the city, we still fill out an application, and consideration and a hearing before the Planning Commission to evaluate the proposed text amendment that then ultimately comes to the City Council for final consideration.
So it would be an application by the city or the City Council?
The City Council, similar to the action that occurred with this consideration, the Council could initiate, request staff to pursue that text amendment, and we would follow a similar process.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you.
I have several comments to make, but I'm going to restrict it to just one before the public hearing portion of the meeting. Mr. City Attorney, it was brought up earlier by someone that should this change be made, it creates some barrier to changing it back or changing it to something else in the future. I'm not aware of anything that would be a barrier to prevent that from happening or any other zoning change that may occur for any parcel here in the city.
I'm not aware of any rule or regulation that would prevent that either, Mr. Mayor. I believe that council has the authority and the discretion to make those zoning changes pursuant to our code.
All right, thank you. Mr. City Manager, do you have a comment?
The only restriction that I would say is that we would have to follow the same process, much like with the tax amendment, is that we would follow the same process that anybody else would follow when they ask for zoning changes.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments prior to public hearing? Thank you, Mr. Mays. At this time then, we will open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak in the public hearing? Ms. DeShane?
Judy DeShane. From what I have heard here, and Mr. Mays as well as Councilwoman Bridges, saying what the national parks allow, and that being the definition of a park, I would assume, national parks allow and lease out for food, beverages, hotel accommodations, almost anything in a national park. Anything you find in a town, you can usually find in a national park. So I don't think making this a park is going to restrict anything that would profit the city or anyone within the city. It doesn't rule anything out under the definitions we're hearing here tonight. And I would like to see it, because that part of the reason to make it a park is to give it a better protection than just leaving it a commercial property. And I realized somebody did a survey or had somebody sign petitions, but I've never seen it, nor did I hear of the petition. Now, granted, don't own a business, so I assume it only circulated in certain parts. Well, that 100 or 200 people is a far cry from the 16,000 people that live here, and we have to consider out of those 16,000, probably 10 or 11 are adults and whose opinion would, the registered voters, and they would be allowed to sign something like that, and it would be accepted. So if you're going to put this out in the public, we need to put the petition sitting out in front of the credit union, and I'll go sit there if necessary and get signatures for one way or the other, if that's what the council decides to do. But right now, you have the authority to make the change, and I'm in favor of letting you make the change as long as you make it my way. I'm very easy to get along with, you know. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment, or excuse me, at the public hearing? Mrs. Newby?
Sharon Newby, and good evening, Council. I want to just do a little different perspective. I have a report entitled Boulder City, Nevada Historic Water Filtration Plant Reuse Study. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but if anybody else wants to look it up, if you haven't seen it, since I'm fairly new in town, I had not seen this. And it talks about the conditions of the deed, which was a 30-year thing, which I think we've been told about before. And the mortgage, we will not resell, lease, mortgage. And just to kind of consolidate, since we don't have to go on, it had some suggestions. One was an art gallery, and that's too expensive to redo for that. But their conclusion was, to paraphrase, the city will approach reuse in a multifaceted manner. 2 community parks provide space for gardening and or to relax. And the potential use as a museum for public work has merit and will be studied further. This was done by Brock Armerton, January 31st, 2006. So this is not a new thing, as other people have said, but it has wonderful pictures in it if you want to look it up. And since both sides of the water filtration plant have been called a park in an official Boulder City document, I hope you will consider the entire acreage a park. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Please state your name.
My name is Britt West. I reside at 536 Cherry Street. I'm here representing 3 family-owned properties that are all owner-occupied, 528, 532, and 536. These properties are all within 1,000 feet of the water filtration plant. Because I know I have the time available, I'm going to take just a few minutes to bring the council's attention to the Planning Commission at their January 15th meeting about 3 weeks ago. I was there when this corrective zoning for the water treatment plant was first discussed. I sat in the audience and I listened to 15 neighbors describe why the parcel should remain a park and have corrective zoning put in place. Each argument was really compelling. Nearly all the speakers were from the historic district. There were only 3 speakers there that were in favor of the zoning remaining commercial. 2 developers and an unknown person. Then I watched in amazement as our Planning Commission voted against the wishes of those in attendance and the city staff's wishes, and took the position of a developer. This was not representative government. It was an egregious example of a council-appointed commission failing to listen to their constituents. Furthermore, the discussions of the Planning Commission veered away from the published agenda. Comments were solicited regarding the use of the property when only a zoning change was noted in the agenda. This may have been a violation of the Nevada open meeting law. I ask the council, please consult with the Planning Commission members as to what a representative government is, as well as proper parliamentary procedure. That brings us to today. So I appear before you guys as both a homeowner and a Nevada certified real estate appraiser. I'm the immediate past president of the Appraisal Institute. That's for all of the appraisers in the state of Nevada. Our practice covers all of Nevada. I visit many small towns that have the same problems that we face here in Boulder City. As a homeowner and a grandfather to 4 young children who enjoy the park often, we ask that corrective zoning be put in place. When we bought our homes in the historic district, proximity to parks was very important. As part of our purchase of these properties, we conducted complete due diligence, and the subject parcel was noted to be a park and published as such in city literature. We use this park at least twice a week. It's a park, albeit in disrepair, but it's a park. Now, as a Nevada certified residential appraiser, I can report that if this property is allowed to have a commercial use in the future, there will likely be a measurable detrimental effect to to residential properties in the area. There are several case studies that support this. Now, I will agree that the property is not currently being used to its highest and best use. Parks and government spaces never are. There are many higher and better uses for the park that have been discussed within our community. These alternative uses do not involve a commercial use. Many are found within other similar communities. Northern Nevada has the same problems we do. These uses should be fully explored. Again, we are in favor of the corrective zoning to be consistent with the current use and the historic use of the park. This should be consistent with the wishes of many nearby residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, sir.
I don't know if I should consider this an honor or not, but I'm one of the few you didn't know, so I'm really pleased to be up here.
Well, if you'll introduce yourself, then we will.
Well, I was planning to. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
My name's Jim Stasiowski, and my wife and I live at 245 Bighorn Drive, and we're relatively new residents. We moved here last spring. I don't take a position at all on whether the zoning is proper or should be changed. I do want to point out, and I've lived in several communities, things like museums and cultural arts centers sound wonderful, and we all want them, but they're very rarely self-sustaining. And if you decide to put a museum in there, you might be putting a different one in next year and the year after that. So I just I read all the testimony at the park, at the Planning Commission, and the word museum kept coming up. And I thought, what are the odds that it's going to be able to succeed? At some point, a museum is probably going to come to you hat in hand and say, we need some money from the city to stay open. And again, I don't take any position on the zoning, rezoning. It's not anything I've really thought about. But I don't want anybody to go into this thinking, all right, we're going to have a great museum there, or a great cultural center. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Sinayagan?
In listening to the people that spoke against it or raised concerns, I don't see any reason for not going ahead and having the zoning match the master plan. That's how it's done. That's what master plans are for. And there's more risk of leaving it at C1 because the C1 zoning supersedes the master plan in the event there were an application. In terms of the things brought up about the use, in the definition of park, it allows for quasi-public use. Quasi means whatever pretty much you want it to be. It says anything that is seemingly public. We have a pool in the public park. We have many uses that aren't specifically listed in that. And a museum would be either a public use or a quasi-use. And it doesn't even have to be a museum. It could be anything. And even if that building were to sit vacant, as it has been for years, that nothing happened, to me, I'd still appreciate that. It's a beautiful thing to look at. And it's been, the elephant in the room is it's been raised to turn it into a bar and a wedding chapel and a restaurant, and that isn't consistent with the master plan. It isn't consistent with the neighborhood. It isn't consistent with the wishes of the people in the area. And it isn't even a possible use. It isn't even permitted under a conditional use. If it were changed back, contrary to what the former city attorney of Las Vegas was saying, and in support of what the mayor was saying, it would be a simple process of proposing it when a use came along. It would go to the planning commission, come back to the council, and it would go through a public hearing. The benefit of doing that, if there was some use that was proposed, it would have more control by possibly doing a text amendment that was specific, and it would make it part of a public hearing where it wouldn't be if the zoning were let to C1. So to recap, I see no reason in not going ahead with appropriately making this to match the master plan and its current use as a park. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? In the back? Mrs. Powell?
I'm Elizabeth Powell. I live at 417 Birch Street, just steps away from this property. And definitely it should be rezoned as a park because it has been de facto a public park for over 20 years. All the time that the city had management of this area and the area was under a deed restriction, the city neglected it, it's obvious, okay? But the building stood there. And it has stood there for 90 years almost. It can still stand another 90 years. You can see that the building is solid. It doesn't have to have a repurposed use, and it doesn't have to be done immediately, and we shouldn't even need to worry about that problem until it becomes a park. Then we can see what we can do for the building, because the building is an iconic, beautiful thing that we all enjoy just looking at, which we have done for 90 years. It has never been open to the public, never. Except for during those times when we had historic preservation days, and people really enjoy going in and seeing what it's like inside this water treatment plant. We heard during the Planning Commission meeting about an engineer who said this was fabulous technology that has almost disappeared from our country. And we have it just sitting here because it's been sitting here for 90 years. Why does everybody say it's got to be repurposed? And they talk about the building. There are other uses of this area besides just looking at the building, which is beautiful. People take pictures in front of the building. Their Christmas pictures, their wedding pictures, their baby pictures, all the time. People walk their dogs in the park every day, except for right now, it's all torn up. And people are saying to me, what's happening? What's happening? Why can't I walk my dog here anymore? It is used by people. Gardeners use the community gardens, and you know I've been a community gardener for a long time, and except for the last few years, thanks. And people use the sculpture garden. They walk through the sculpture gardens. They enjoy the area. It is in a residential area. It has been a park. We've all used it as a park, and certainly it should not be commercial. It's off the beaten track. It's on the edge of town. Leave it a park. Rezone it as a government park. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Turner?
Ray Turner. I liked what Libby had to say, especially with regard to there being no rush. The building is not going anywhere. It has a brand new roof on there that came about as part of a fundraising effort by Boulder City History and Arts Foundation. There are several other projects that need attention. The windows need attention. The place needs to be painted and cleaned up inside. And there's one bathroom. It just needs to be plumbed. There's already electricity being piped up to the building itself. It's mounted on the exterior. So I imagine the basics for lighting and also the plumbing for a bathroom is probably not going to cost $250,000, Glenn. I disagree. So there's no rush. Things don't happen overnight. This is a nice first step, perhaps, if it works out for us, because we'd like to see restoration take place, and we'd like to start more fundraising events. And if the property has got park status, it's going to be a lot more appealing to people when they're considering getting involved in a fundraising effort or contributing to a fundraising. The developer who wants to develop the building earlier suggested that the Stantec report recommended that other uses be found. Well, it also said that the roof of the building was in need of attention and repair, that it was in fair condition. And the roof was fully restored about 8 months before this study even began. So I really can't take a lot that study has seriously with regard to the water filtration plant in particular. I'm not saying the whole thing is flawed, but definitely in regard to the water filtration plant, it was downplayed. There were many, many pictures in the Stantec report, which cost $489,000, and they took a lot of photographs. And when it came to the water filtration plant, they took a lot of photographs of the floor, the concrete floor, which is just a concrete floor. They took pictures, lots of pictures of peeling paint, tons of pictures of peeling paint. They didn't take a single picture of the spiral staircase that's in the beautiful spiral staircase that's in the building, or the massive pipe gallery that's underground. Very, very impressive places, and examples of the condition of the building. Could take a few pictures of the pipes, at least in the water filtration plant. In the study, they said that the building was almost completely gutted. Well, that's ludicrous, because the place is just full of massive big pipes, and they're historic artifacts. They're very, very impressive. Every time we have tours in the building, there's always professional photographers that show up, or amateur photographers, and they're just loving taking the pictures of these very impressive artifacts that are inside the building. So I think that the Stantec report with regard to the water filtration plant is completely flawed. It's completely flawed, and it should not be used as an example when talking about the building or its potential or the park, etc. I still have time. I'd just like to say thank you to all my fellow Boulder City residents who came down and had the nerve to stand up here and speak, because even I'm nervous right now. I'm always nervous when I have to speak up here, and it takes a lot for people to come down and speak up. And I would be surprised if there was even one member of the list of people who signed that petition that was mentioned earlier that even bothered to show up here tonight. Maybe I'm wrong, might be one or two, but anyway, thanks to all the people who did come out, and thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
My pen.
Last call. All right, we will close the public hearing portion of this. As I had mentioned before, I had several comments to make. I want to begin with what this process is and what it is not. I brought this forward to council to do this zoning change, and it wasn't something that I decided, woke up one morning and said, hey, let's go rezone Reflection Center Park. That'll be a good idea. It's an absurdity to say that this effort is new or that it's my idea. I'm certainly not claiming it being the one that originated this. I had asked for, and Madam City Clerk, we have copies of the deed and the minutes from the council meeting of 1994 available at the back of the room. So I'm going to refer to a couple of things in that deed. This is on page 3 of that. To have and to hold the property subject, however, to each of the following conditions subsequent, which shall be binding upon and enforceable against the grantee, its successor, and assigns as follows. This is what's known as a deed restriction. That for a period of 30 years from the date hereof, the property herein conveyed will be used continuously for health purposes in accordance with the proposed program and plan of the grantee as set forth in its application dated the 12th day of July, 1984, and for no other purpose. That during the aforesaid period of 30 years, the grantee will not resell, lease, mortgage, or encumber or otherwise dispose of any part of the property or interest therein, except as the grantor or its successor in function may authorize in writing. Okay, that's very clear to me. When this property was given to Boulder City by the federal government, they said, you're going to use this building for the health purposes in accordance with the proposed program. And if you look at that proposed program, which nobody seems to be able to find, I know I have seen a copy of it, it's very broad. It's for the enjoyment of the community. It's for the benefit of the public. The next item that I'm going to refer to are the minutes from a council meeting that was held on February 22nd, 1994. So that's almost 26 years ago. At that time, a woman that's known to many of us, Teddy Fenton, who had been here in Boulder City for a very, very long period of time, donated $70,000. Now that was a chunk of change back in 1994. So once again, when I hear things like, well, nobody's ever done anything. Well, Teddy Fenton, of her own money, not a fundraiser, of her own money, gave $70,000 for that property to be improved. And I'll read a portion of what her letter said to the city council at that time. I am submitting a proposal to create a landscaped area that would provide benches and evergreen shade trees. The area would be named Reflection Center. My proposal includes my idea of having a specific area set aside to honor persons who have given of their time, talents, and money towards the betterment of Boulder City. Names that immediately come to mind are Elton Garrett, Jan McAaron, Angus McAaron, and L. Raddig. Many more deserving, but those are the most recently deceased and fresh in our memory. Restoring and maintaining the structure, which is the water filtration plant, is desirable to retain its historical significance for Boulder City, but beautification to improve the surrounding areas of utmost importance. The trees, plants, and walkways, along with sculpture throughout, will give us a pleasant area to walk and relax. When the Center for the Arts is ready to begin the renovation of the interior, and by the way, the Center for the Arts was a nonprofit at that time, they will have the beautiful grounds already surrounding it. The building will be cleaned as previously demonstrated with high-pressure water to remove most of the old paint, it says, but I'm sure she meant paint, and reveal the original brick. Those areas where this is not feasible, we will paint a color closely matching or complementary to the brick. That sounds like a plan to me. Sounds like a very definite plan to me, and it included the water filtration plant. It was not just referring to the sculpture garden. It was not just referring to the community gardens. She had a plan for that entire parcel. After she submitted that letter, City Manager Forbes noted that there is no city funding available for this project, so all funding must come from private donations. He added final plans must be approved by the city's Public Works Director, and the city is not acting as the contractor for the project. Councilman Ferraro moved to accept the concept of the Reflection Center as depicted by Alan Stromberg's plans for the project. He added the final plans would be subject to approval of the Public Works Director. That was seconded by Councilman Stubbs and approved unanimously by the City Council. 26 years ago, it was approved as a park by the City Council. And nothing happened. Teddy Fenton donated her money. The Desert Sculptors, who have renowned members of their group, who have donated to our city's sculptures on Nevada Way and Arizona Way, have donated sculptures there. But the comment comes from a former planning commissioner that nothing's been done out there. Nobody ever did anything. Nobody cared about that property. Well, there's one proof that it is. If you look in our packet, you'll see other efforts in there. I know I have talked to multiple people, Friends of the Arts, Center for the Arts, Boulder City History and Arts Foundation, Garden Club, Nevada Preservation Foundation, And they're all interested. They've been interested in that property because they understand the significance of that for Southern Nevada, not just Boulder City. And yet we get people coming here and saying, well, you've never done anything. This should all be made public. It's in writing. These are public documents. They're available on the city website. This process is a public process. We are now having our third public hearing on this. It's not as though we were doing things secretively. As I know, I attended a historic preservation committee a few years ago where Mr. Larry Turner appeared, no agenda item on the agenda for that meeting, and proceeded to say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to carve up that parcel, and I'm going to pay the city for 0.99 acres so that I can slip under the requirement of having to go to a vote of the people. I'll buy that, and then by the goodwill of Boulder City, they're going to donate the rest of that land to me, and that way the folks of Boulder City never get a voice on what happens to that parcel. That was his proposal. Okay? That's not being publicly aware. That's trying to hide things from the public. Another example is the graffiti removal work that was done out there. No bid contract. Went to Turner Construction. Spoke to one of the guys doing the work. He was a day laborer who got hired just for that. Not exactly a professional. Again, a no bid contract, no specifications, not offered out to other bidders, and yet we're told, well, you have to do things in public. Well, that didn't get done in public either. So we're here for our third public hearing to make sure that the community has input on this. And whenever any zoning change is proposed, we have a law. And that says that all people residing within 750 feet of the proposed property will be notified and asked for their input. And I want to stress that this is called a zoning matter, which means we are talking about particular zones within the city. And that's why that requirement is in there, to notify people within 750 feet so that those people who are most interested have an opportunity to know what's happening and be able to respond to it. And when I looked in the packet, out of more than a dozen responses, there was only one negative response. And I know over the past month, I have received probably a couple of dozen emails. Again, only one was negative with regard to the zoning change for that property. So it's very tiresome to me when I hear people come and say, well, you need to wait a little bit longer. 1984 was when the federal government gave Boulder City this property. We've waited long enough for this change to be made. It's a simple, straightforward change that accurately depicts the use of that property. And when I watched the Planning Commission meeting on this, I wish I could say I was stunned, but I've been to enough Planning Commission meetings to know that was the same stuff over and over again. Don't talk about what the application is. Bring up stuff that doesn't matter. Planning Commissioner Nate Lassoff, he had the important question of wanting to know whether the gardeners pay any fees for the use of the land out there. I don't know what that has to do with anything. Commissioner Lassoff then crossed an important line. Just prior to their public hearing, he said he wanted to hear about suggestions on the use of the building, not on the agenda, not to be considered, not a purpose of why you rezone land. Then speakers came for the public hearing, and they took his diversion. Again, not a reason for rezoning that building. Planning commissioners should not be trying to influence public hearings by telling the public what they want to hear. That's why they're public hearings. There are a number of other things that occurred at that public hearing. I know that Vice Chair Paul Matuskas at least twice tried to reel in the wayward conversations that were happening. He did his best to get things back on track. Well, I know we had 2 new commissioners there. That was their first meeting. You need to understand what these things are about. It's not about political infantry where you get to sit up there and offer your opinions. You're there to apply the existing law. You're not being asked for your input on policy. You're being asked to apply what the law is. This parcel qualifies as a government park. It was designated that way. It's been approved by council previously that way. And again, I will now open this up to the other council members, but I'll be more than happy to make the motion on this to approve the change.
Well, I'd be happy to second that motion.
Well, any other discussion? Councilwoman Bridges.
Yeah, I just, 2 things. And I want to thank the Public Works Department because I've received a number of emails regarding the work that's being done there. It's not being demolished, it's not being ruined, it's not being dug up, it's being improved. It's a $95,000 improvement. They're putting in new irrigation, they're putting in new lights, they're putting new footings on benches, and replacing any trees, bushes that have died with brand new. So I think that's important to know that this is being treated like a park. So that's.
Councilwoman Fold, any comments?
I don't know what to say. I don't know if I can follow that. No, I did have a couple of thoughts of, I think there's a lot of, this is a rezoning, and I think a lot of, and I can't interpret what she did, but just looking at it, I feel like a lot of mix-up was made by the future possible use of the building. And that's not, that might be a future agenda item, but that's not the agenda item before us. We're talking about the land use and what the land is used for. In order for us to make a zoning change, the council has to find 2 things. That the amendment is in general conformance with the adopted comprehensive plan for the city. It's not in general conformance, it's an exact conformance because the master plan of the city right now has that property zoned as a park. And that was done in 2003. And the master plan comes from the citizens. Outreach is done, and that's formed through citizen outreach, through many, many meetings and surveys. And so I find that that is complete conformance for this rezone. And that it proposed, the other thing that council needs to find is that this amendment promotes the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the city. You know, I went out there recently because I've been thinking about this item for a long time since it's brought up initially. And I went out there and had lunch. Even during that construction that's going on out there, that is a very peaceful and open space for that community. And I cannot see that. And so I also agree that that promotes the health, safety, morals of the city. It's a very special place. It can continue to be so, and I think that this should have been done a very, very long time ago.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess to clarify, because there has been a concern that perhaps public outreach, that the voters need to decide that it should be the community that decides. As has been pointed out, this is the 3rd hearing on the matter, so there has been a number of opportunity for the community to create input. We are talking about the zoning here. I know I spoke a little bit to the building in particular as far as future uses go. We are talking about the zoning. As we move forward, is there not more town halls planned as part of the Stantec study that was done? Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
That is correct. I believe tentatively scheduled is, I'm looking at our Public Works Director, the 3rd and 4th of March.
Yeah, we're looking at doing an evening public hall meeting on March 3rd and then a late morning on March 4th. It's not set in stone yet, but that's what we're looking at right now.
And are those general workshops for the entire study, or are we going to have specific ones depending on specific things?
That was going to be for the study in general. We're working through the logistics of that right now.
But there will be other opportunities to talk about other public outreach. And then there was also a comment about down the line if we wanted to change based on this zoning and things of that nature. Again, we would have to go, if we wanted text amendments, that would have to go through another public hearing process. Is that correct, Director Mays?
Correct.
So every step of the way, as we get there, we are required by Nevada state law to have public input and have solicit the input of the community. So the notion that we are somehow moving in, I guess I don't understand what the idea is, how this would personally benefit us in any way, or that we're doing this of our own volition. I have been hearing about the talk of needing to update and correct the zoning for a number of years before I ever even considered running for council. There's been a number of public meetings, be it the city unfortunately has not held any of those. I do think that is unfortunate. But this is a new city council. We are starting to correct that course. There is a reason I ran on historic preservation. I guess I'm getting off of it because we shouldn't be. I'm not talking about preservation efforts right now. I'm not talking about repurposing. We are talking about the zoning. But when I look at the master plan, that is the guiding document. That is something, as it was said, a lot of outreach goes out into the community. Everybody in the community, maybe not everybody, but everybody who wants to participate, participates in that. In the master plan, it is designated a park and has been for a number of years. So to say that somehow this zoning does not fit that definition, because people have personal or private interests in that, that's not an acceptable reason to not justify the zoning. We shouldn't rely on outdated zoning or neglected zoning to make our decisions, to say, well, let's nullify it as a park. It's no longer a park because we never did anything with it. That's not appropriate. In fact, it's inappropriate. Anyways, I will end with that. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm sorry.
He's got one more thing to say.
Well, I do want to point out though, I did receive a petition with a number of people asking that they opposed it, the resolution, to leave it up to a vote. It was a little ambiguous, but I don't think that was the purpose here. I don't want to completely dismiss that either. I know it's one thing to come to a meeting, but not everybody always has time. So I don't want to completely dismiss it because it wasn't that long ago when a petition was circulated to save a building. Once again, this isn't necessarily what we're talking about. That was just dismissed by the council. And I think that that's wrong. And we do need to listen when people raise concern about this. And so perhaps they're not all here, but it is several names. I used to verify petitions as one of my past jobs. I saw really nothing outstanding that made it look any different or not real in any regards. It seemed very as though a number of people, I recognize many of the names. Many of them I've spoken with about the matter. Many of them don't disagree that it should be a park, but that they do believe in having more outreach. So I would like to say that we do need to continue having discussions about this space because that is what the community has always said. And so I don't want to act as though I am dismissing people's ideas that the public really wants to have a voice in this matter, because they do. But every step of the way, we will have opportunity for the public to reach out. And so I just want to make that clear that I'm not trying to dismiss the efforts or the thoughts of anybody who opposes this, because I don't think that's I don't think it's a bad idea. And I welcome conversations, different ideas. That's how we come to the best place in Boulder City. It makes us a better community when we all have discussions. We shouldn't be afraid of people with different ideas or opposing ideas. We should all come together and discuss them so that we can make this city a better place. And now I will leave it at that.
And I would agree with that. I know what I received was not a petition with signatures. I received something with mostly typewritten names of businesses here in town. So I'm not sure when this petition actually arrived, but I had not seen it. Again, the suggestion or the implication that we're not including the public or we don't intend to is an absurdity. We have included the public throughout this process, and I am more than happy to continue that. But what's important to also realize is we are not making a determination on the future use of that building. We are talking about the zoning for that parcel of land. And with that, I will go ahead again with my motion and ask for a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, we will now move to item number 4. Consideration of Bill 1867, which is the update of the city code. I would just like to say at the outset of this that I intend to make a motion to hold this in abeyance. This is a massive project. I believe the code runs to around 1,000 pages. We've now had it for a few weeks. That's not a sufficient amount of time for me to have gone through. So again, I just want to make that clear, but certainly the other council members may have other ideas on that, so I'll open it up for further discussion. Any questions or comments about this bill?
Mayor, I would agree that there are certain things that I still need some answers made on this, although I have sat with staff and they've been very helpful with this huge change. I have a couple of questions about some of the terms that have been changed within the code, that one of which was brought up tonight, that may change the legality or legal issues that we might have to enforce in the future of when this is enacted. And so I would agree that a little more time is needed.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilman Adams?
I've been reviewing this for a very long time. I did have some concerns as it goes. Certainly, a lot of those questions have been answered over time, things that I was looking at because a little bit of a misunderstanding on my part of why certain things weren't changed yet and how they will once things get approved. For the most part, I think I have been satisfied, but again, this is huge, and any opportunity to review something so big, I will personally always take, but I don't want to push things down the road to where we don't get there. I'd like to, so if we are talking about setting in abeyance, I would at least like to be very specific about when it's going to come back up.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I also agree that I'd like to make sure that we have a specific date. I recognize that there are things that I'd like to read again, but as a whole, that there's no major, that these are not substantive changes, that these are making sure that things are consistent with NRS, that whatever's obsolete is not in there anymore. And like I said, I also would like to make sure that we have a date we're going to do this, because I know this is a huge task moving the code over from our previous vendor to this new vendor.
Madam City Clerk?
Well, first, I'd like to say that this project has been going on for a year and a half, and I do appreciate the council members who did come in and ask their questions and spend a lot of time reviewing it. I do appreciate their efforts. I provided the code in December and was very clear that, we'd be bringing it forward for an introduction. I offered workshops. I'd offered to meet with you one-on-one. I offered to spend as much time as possible to go over it with you line by line. Although this is a recodification, I want to assure you that nothing in this code is that big of a deal. It is a cleanup. Our code right now as it sits has problems in it we have laws on our books that are unconstitutional. We have laws on our books that conflict with state law. We have laws that are ambiguous that cannot be enforced. No substantive changes have been made. It violates our charter. Now, when we were going through it and the review was being done, there were issues pointed out. For example, the parking ordinance. That was, obviously an issue that the chief wanted to address. That all staff was made aware that we can't do that. You, as the council, set the policy. We hired a professional company to come in and review, and with a huge staff of attorneys in consultation with our city attorney to review this. It has been every single word of this document has been looked at. So this is the first time I'm hearing from several of you that you want to postpone this. And it's very disappointing to hear because I have literally had to neglect other work to bring this forward. It has been just consuming of both, not just my time, but of the deputy city clerk's time as well. I just want to make clear to you, that's of course your prerogative, and you don't have to adopt it at all. But as we go forward, it has a trickle-down effect. Number one, we're paying and running two codes at the same time. So it's double work and it's double money. And number two, we postpone other amendments that are required because we're not going to go through a complete amendment on the old code just to do it twice and then have to redo the new code. The simple changes we made from intro to consideration were 112 pages that we had to redo. So you can hold it in abeyance for a month or 10 years, but I just want you to be aware of what the effects are. And it's just very disappointing that throughout the months, after briefing after briefing, I have offered and offered to meet with you. And two of you did come in. I do appreciate it. But to sit here in a meeting and be blindsided when I've spent months is disappointing.
Let's try and focus on what we're doing here. I understand that you may have some disappointment about it. When was the last time the code had this type of review?
1995, which is very, very unusual. Recodification is a standard normal practice.
So it's been some time ago. Yes. It's been 25 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my position is I want to be careful about what we're doing. And with a change of code that encompasses 1,000 pages, yeah. So I will go ahead and make the motion then to hold this in abeyance until the second meeting in March. That would give us about 6 additional weeks here.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
Yes, City Clerk, could you, Madam City Clerk, could you, you mentioned that we are currently paying for 2 different codifiers right now. What effect does, by postponing it by this amount of time, what effect would that have? What is that? You talked about a trickle-down effect, just so I have an understanding.
So the trickle-down effect is that for the biggest thing is we're holding off on our building code for adoption of the new code so it can be correct. And so we don't want to make, already we had to stop the process in February of 2019 because at some point when they're making their review to see what conflicts, and as we continue to codify in our old code, now they have more to review, and then it's not just one little section we're changing, it could affect numerous sections. So we have an old code on our website that is current, that I send the codes to both codifiers. But now we have the code that you're looking at that's only current until February 19th. I have outstanding ordinances. They're waiting to send off and supplement one once it's adopted. So it makes it, as it's postponed and more things get codified, it's more confusing, and therefore more mistakes can be made. It just, it exacerbates the problem we already have.
And then I'll also just comment as far as the second meeting in March. I was planning to note this sooner than later, but I do not plan on being present at that meeting. I will be getting married very shortly, so
That's no excuse.
So perhaps the meeting before, I do think time is of the essence, if that is
Well, I don't
amenable.
want to go less than that, so then I'll be happy to amend the motion to the first meeting in April then. Okay? We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I think,
That was,
Well, I've amended the motion, so we have a new motion. You don't want to extend? Okay. Anyone wishing to, a second for the first meeting in April? That amendment fails. We still have a motion and a second for the last meeting in March. Apparently, people are unappreciative of your nuptials coming up. Councilwoman Bridges?
No, I want to apologize. I do not want to read 110 pages of those corrections that you mentioned. I have read through this. I can understand the concern of, gee, this is a really important document. I also have to trust that this has been worked on by numerous attorneys, code attorneys, that this recodification has been taken seriously. I would go it along with a short abeyance. I do not want to see this continued on. I am concerned. I know that in order to change code, we have to have a code.
Well, let me just clarify, to address some of your concern. When this, in addition to a professional company reviewing this code, every single department head had a hand in this. They were responsible for their section. But in addition to that, Tammy and I sat across from each other and literally read, when we received the proof, every single word of the new code against the old code. She'd read one portion and I followed along.
I know that you have explained that before, the effort that's gone into this. You had started this a year ago, more than a year ago now. I do understand the effort because I've been trying to get through it as well. So I get that, and Councilwoman Bridges is certainly entitled to her position on this.
Well, I just want to assure you.
But I do think you have explained this to us in prior meetings.
Well, I have, but I just want to assure you the changes that are made are formatting and that type of thing. Nobody went in and changed the rules. So I understand that you want time to review. Of course, you should have that time. But I gave it to you in December, and I've offered and offered and offered. If you need more time, great.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I...
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a comment, Mayor. And I understand and I appreciate the work that Madam City Clerk, you have done on this, and I understand your frustration with it not going forward tonight. I feel like there are changes in the fact that some things have changed in the last 25 years in NRS, and that now that we're going to implement some of those things that haven't been implemented in their city for all this time. And that's where my concern is in wanting to review this further so that the public can understand and know that things that they deal with on a daily basis may change. There's a couple of things, like, for instance, how many children you have in your home when you're doing childcare, whether or not you can shoot in city limits. Because before, I understand that a lot of people believe that they can go 1,000 feet from the nearest residence and shoot out in the desert. And they've been practicing that for many, many years. NRS says you cannot shoot within city limits. That's the entire city area of Boulder City. I think these are big changes that need some time and understanding so that the public can understand that there's going to be things that are changed that are significant in how they've been living their life in the last 25 years. And so I understand that you're frustrated, but I feel like the public needs to know. And if I don't have an understanding of it, how can I make a decision for the public?
I'm not frustrated about holding it in abeyance. It's no more work for me to send one ordinance to one codifier than it is to two. It just is it will be more confusing down the road, not for me. My frustration is hearing about it the first time tonight.
Okay.
So that's my frustration. But I just wanted to address that. We're not changing any laws. If there's a conflict with the laws, how the police is enforcing it, if it's a conflict with NRS, they're following the proper laws. What is being changed in the code does not change how we will do business, if that makes sense. It would be just clarifying language. We're not changing how we will be doing business.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to amend it to that we set the abeyance to the first meeting in March.
Anyone wishing to second that? Well, excuse me. I don't accept your amendment. We have a motion and a second on the floor. I do not accept your amendment. All in favor of abeyance until the second meeting in March?
I'm sorry, can I get some clarification? When you say the second meeting in March, do you want that as the intro, or you want that to be your consideration date?
Do we need to do an introduction again?
Absolutely, we have to start over.
Okay, then is there sufficient time to have a bill introduction at the first meeting in March?
I don't even know what day it is. February 11th. If we can, yes, we can put the intro on the first meeting in March if you want it considered at the second meeting. But I didn't know if you wanted it considered at the second meeting or if you wanted it introduced.
I want it considered at the second meeting. That's the motion that I've made.
Okay, then I'll bring the intro forward at the first meeting in March.
Okay. All in favor of it being considered at the second meeting in March?
Aye.
Aye?
Nay.
All opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-2. Okay, moving on to item number 5, Resolution 7068. This is with regard to civil service rule changes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Bryce Bolt, your Administrative Services Director. You have before you this evening revisions to the Civil Service Rules and Regulations. The bulk of these reservations are recommendations of the Pool Pack. They provide a review service for us. Moreover, these revisions have been reviewed by and approved by the Civil Service Commission. And this evening, I respectfully request that you approve Resolution 7068.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Sure.
Councilwoman Hoskins?
Well, I was a civil servant for 30 years, and I talked with you about this yesterday. After reviewing that a little bit, I have some more questions, and I don't have time to get the answers to them right now. I'd like to do a little bit more research. Would that be a problem?
Not at all.
Okay. And maybe hold it till the next meeting?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I really don't feel comfortable in a couple of areas. I want to just get those clarified. Okay, thank you.
A question that I had asked, has this been reviewed by Pool Pact?
It's their template, but they haven't reviewed this specific one, these changes. I did their changes, but they haven't reviewed this document.
So has it gone through their human resource personnel for review?
No, well, no, not this particular document. I mean, their template is the one that gives me the changes, gives me the bulk of the changes. And I make those changes, but I didn't run it through them again.
Okay, do you normally do that?
No.
Okay. The reason I ask that is not the impression I've had from what they would like their members to do. If we're going to make changes, they've suggested, at least a couple of board meetings that I've attended, that they have an opportunity to review changes that we intend before implementing them.
These are their suggested changes, but I could certainly run it through Pool Pack.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Councilmember Hoskins, you said you had some concerns in certain areas. Did you want to share that? Just, I mean, if we are going to be holding this abeyance, so that it's something that I can look in while we have time, while we can talk in public, in a public setting?
No, I can't really be specific tonight because they're just issues, and I just got out of another long 4-hour meeting that I just didn't really get a chance to look at things, and there were questions, and I wanted to ask you if that was okay. So if you think it's okay, then I'd like to hold it in advance.
Absolutely, it's up to you.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to hold it in advance.
I'll second. Any other discussion?
How long are we talking? I like to make sure that we know what days, so we can prepare.
The next meeting.
So that would be the second meeting in February. Okay, any other discussion?
Mayor, I just have a question. How often are these rules and regulations updated?
Annually.
Every year?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so we have I believe we have a civil service committee or commission?
Yes, we
Is
did.
that correct? And they reviewed these changes?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Do they have any input in the changes that are made, or they brought before them after the changes have been suggested by, or however those came about?
The revisions are brought to them for their review and approval.
Okay. And then, so it's so I'm just making sure I understand this process correctly before this came from, that the city attorneys, could you answer this one? You are not normally involved in this annual update?
I am not.
Okay, this goes through our pool pact? Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? All in favor then of holding this in abeyance till the second meeting in February?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Bolt.
Thank you.
We will now move to item number 6, appointment of an alternate to the Assembly Bill 73 Implementation Working Group relating to homeless persons in Clark County. Mrs. Callaway.
Mayor, council members, and Boulder City residents, I am Julie Callaway, Parks and Recreation Manager, and your representative for the AB 73 Implementation Working Group related to people experiencing homelessness in Clark County. The working group is a temporary board meeting bi-monthly through October of this year. To fulfill meeting requirements and quorum requirements, a staff alternate is needed in the event that the staff representative cannot attend a meeting. Staff is recommending the city manager as the alternate. He has been actively involved since the creation of the working group. As the AB 73 working group evolves, it has become apparent that Boulder City needs adequate representation with the potential fiscal impact resulting from the working group's recommendations. There are 2 city managers and a county manager that either serve as the committee representatives or as the alternates. For these reasons, the staff is recommending Al Noyola to be the appointed alternate to the AB 73 working group.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? Councilman Adams?
I'd just like to say I had removed this item from the agenda last time. It was not an issue with the recommendation that staff had made, but rather simply the language of the item. That being said, I had no other further discussion as far as who I think it should be, but I do understand staff's recommendation, and I definitely support it. If anybody else wants to talk, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll motion to nominate.
I would just like to offer my view of it. And again, Mr. City Manager, that none of this is personal, but the homelessness issue here in Boulder City has been something that was brought to my attention even before I was elected to City Council in 2017, that there were issues. There were issues with homeless encampments being very close to existing residences. I tried to get that addressed. I don't feel it was adequately addressed. I felt that it was like, well, not a problem, not my problem. I used to work in construction. There was an old saying in construction, well, I can't see it from my house. So it doesn't matter how big of a problem it is, as long as you can't see it, then it's not a problem. I brought it up multiple times, and the response was not adequate, in my opinion. This AB 73, I went and looked up the original bill on this, and it was quite long, quite extensive, set out funding formulas, all of that. So somebody, at least one legislator, was ready to go on making significant changes that would have increased property taxes and built up significant amounts of revenue for the problem of homelessness. And then there was an amendment to the bill, and pretty much the entire language was struck out of the bill. And what they did in its place was to recommend that this committee be formed. I've served on a number of other boards and commissions at the county level, the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition. The Regional Transportation Commission is actually the designated metropolitan planning organization for Clark County. It's an issue there. I'm on the convention. It's an issue there for all of the resort properties, how the issue gets addressed. The point I'm making is that this is a very important issue. The other thing that I've heard from mayors in other cities, county commissioners, they are taking it upon themselves. They're not waiting for the legislature to pass bills that will raise capital on this. Clark County has taken a significant amount of the fees, not the revenue from the marijuana tax, but fees that are imposed, and put it towards this issue. I think it's about $30 million. The city of Las Vegas is getting ready to implement an ordinance that we'll see how that works out for them, but they've also put a great deal of money into their Corridor of Hope program. When this was first introduced to us here in Boulder City, we named Mrs. Calloway, who has been involved in some of the programs as far as getting counts on the homeless. We also named Beth Bonner, who's here in attendance tonight, who's the Vice President for Catholic Charities, which has, for decades, has provided assistance to the homeless. My concern is that we get people on this committee, and I know this from talking to other elected officials in Clark County. They're not kidding about this committee. They don't want another study that gets done, pitched up on the shelf, and sits there and nothing happens. They're looking for people who have knowledge, understanding, and experience with issues with homelessness. If we are to name a third person, which, by the way, when this was first brought to council, it was that Boulder City was to name 2 people to it. This is now to name 3 people to it, with one being an alternate. I think we can find some folks here in Boulder City, whether with emergency aid or lend a hand, that probably have the experience necessary to actually getting to solutions for this very important problem. So again, nothing personal, Mr. City Manager, but I think we have opportunities here in Boulder City to get people who have more experience in this area. Thank you.
Oh.
Councilwoman Bridges?
Yeah, I also wanted to, I don't know, in terms of an appointment, do we have to have a second or just nominate? Okay, I would like to second Councilman Adams' nomination for our city manager to be on this committee. I was under the impression it said a staff alternative. Is that's what's being requested?
Well, you don't second a nomination.
Okay.
You second a motion, but if you're going to nominate more than one person, the mayor should open nominations, and then Councilmember Adams can nominate the city manager, and then if there's no other nominations, you call for the vote, or you can make a motion to nominate the city manager, then second, and then take the vote. So you either throw in people's names for nomination and then vote on the people submitted, or you can make a motion to appoint him.
I think with the wording of this particular item, staff has already made the nomination. Councilman Adams has indicated that he's willing to go along with that nomination. Apparently, Councilwoman Bridges would like to make a motion then to close nominations, or would you allow other council members to be able to offer their thoughts on this?
I would just like to make a nomination.
Okay, and who would you like to nominate?
Nominate our city manager.
Okay, and that's been done. That name is in. Any other nominations or comments from council?
Councilman
Adams?
I would like to clarify, because I too was under the impression that it was required that a staff member be appointed to this when I'd asked previously. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
You're saying that AB 73 specifically says that there be 2 members, an alternate, and the alternate must be a staff member?
I'm saying that what we are looking for and what the district attorney, how they have interpreted AB 73 is that an alternate is needed for the staff representative, and it needs to be a member of staff, correct?
Thank you for the clarification. Okay. Any other discussions or nominations?
I guess I will formally nominate city manager.
That's been done. Okay. Any other names or discussion? Okay, I will make the motion to close nominations. Councilwoman Bridges, would you like to second that motion?
I will second that motion.
Okay. By acclamation. Thank you. We'll now move to item number 7. Thank you, Mrs. Callaway. Receive report on mid-year budget review.
Diane, Lou's got those. Oh, remote. Thank you. Okay, it's on. Well, we're having fun tonight, aren't we? My name is Diane Pelletier. I'm the Boulder City Finance Director, and I have a pretty innocent presentation tonight on the midpoint of this year. So believe it or not, we are already midway through the 2020 budget, and I'm going to have some highlights and facts for you on the budget. So the current progress of the fiscal year 2020 budget, we have some new revenues to mention, some increased revenues, and we're going to talk about a few expenses, the use of newly created funds called Compensated Absences Fund, Extraordinary Repairs Fund, and Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund. We have used the Compensated Absence Fund already one time through December 31st, and we believe we're going to use it 3 more times between now and the end of the year. On the Extraordinary Repairs Fund, we've already used that one time, and we may end up using it a second time before the end of the year. And 9 out of 10 vehicles have been ordered through the VERF Fund. Revenues. Revenues are coming in as expected. General fund revenues received is 33% as of 12/31/19 and 46% as of 2/1/20. And we're still on target, as some revenues are received quarterly, and it's not an exact 1/12 of the budget either way, every month. So we expect we're on target for the year. And the cemetery revenues are at 62% as of December 31st. And this is just a picture of what I just mentioned. So you can see that the revenues look low for the general fund, but actually we've come up quite a bit since December 31st. So we'll talk about utility revenues. So the revenues for the utilities are coming in as expected. They're actually a little bit ahead. The electric is at 52%. But if you remove each year we use monies from the voter approved fund to supplement the utilities because the voters approved that, and these transfers in are in effect, I believe, till 2022. So it's at 50% if you remove the voter approved transfers in for the electric, at 60% if you remove the voter approved transfers in for the water, 59% if you remove the voter transfers in for the wastewater, and the landfills at 46%. So the total voter-approved money that was transferred from the voter-approved capital improvement fund into the utilities to help them with their capital needs and operating needs is $3,490,000. So the airport fund revenues received is at 55% as of December 31st. And that's just a picture. Sometimes a picture is easier to see than the words. So we have some new general fund revenues. We have a program at the golf course for disc golf, and midway through the year that has generated $8,400 of new revenues. We have a risk management program which is right now being run by the purchasing manager, and with that, if property gets damaged by vehicles hitting a pole or something, we actually now are actively trying to get subrogation on those things, and we are refunding the departments that are spending the funds to fix the damages. So that's a new program, and that has created $1,800 as of December 31st, and there's actually some receivable on that. So we expect it to be more by the end of the year. But this is pretty much a new effort by staff to obtain damages when city property is damaged. So we proactively seek that from the insurance companies. So more increased revenues. This is a really exciting one. I've been here 2 years, and I guess some people would say that's a long time, but when you're new to a city, at least the way I run my department is I like to make sure I have a year under my belt so I can see one cycle and then make sure there's nothing I'm missing before I do what I call dramatic moves. And early on, we saw that we had a lot of money that wasn't earning as much interest as we thought we could safely earn. But I wanted to wait a while to make sure that there was no unforeseen circumstances that we had to deal with or that we didn't know before we did these moves. But since then, we have invested in the local government investment pool, and we've also moved money into Wells Fargo Money Market Sweep in October, and we've actually had a mid-year interest earned 100% greater at this point than it was last year. So the interest earned is allocated to all the funds of the city proportionately. So every fund that's listed separately earns their own interest earnings. And we may even be at one point splitting it up within the LGIP, but right now we're doing it in-house. So looking at expenses, so the fiscal year is 50% complete, and expenses are expected to be at or below 50%. And we're at 49% of the budgeted amount for expenses for the fiscal year. And some expenses are cyclical, so we paid some things, maybe a big amount up front and won't pay them in the second half, but it all averages out, and we're at 49%. So all funds are performing as expected for this point in the fiscal year. And this just shows the general fund year-to-date expenditures and the year-to-date for the cemetery fund. Utilities. The fiscal year is 50% complete and expenses should be at or below that amount, and the electric utility is at 18.5%. And actually, after we transfer money in to take care of the utility administration account, because as we've explained, we talk about that tomorrow morning too, that the 4 electric, water, wastewater, and landfill support and pay for the utility administration fund, which kind of oversees all 4 funds. So the transfer wasn't done as of December 31st for the mid-year, but has been done. So if you take those transfers to fund the utility administration account, the electric fund's at 22%, the water is at 47%, the wastewater is at 24%, and the landfill is at 31%. And the airport expenses are at 34% as of December 31st. And this brings me to tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We'll all be back in this room to have our first work session on the 2021 budget. So, you know, we're at the midway point and we're looking good this year, but tomorrow morning we're going to focus on next year. So that's pretty much my mid-year update. Any questions?
Questions or comments from council?
I'm excited.
In less than 12 hours, you can ask all kinds of questions about the budget.
Well, I'm excited.
We are too.
Mrs. Pelletier, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and as I said, I'm sure we'll have questions for you tomorrow morning. Thank you. We'll now move on then to item number 9. Regarding a discussion, actually, I guess it's the update on the ad hoc pool committee. Recommendations from the committee, item number 8.
Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, my name is Roger Hall, your Parks and Recreation Director for the great city of Boulder City. Item number 8 on the agenda tonight is a presentation of possible staff directive regarding the progress of the Municipal Pool Ad Hoc Committee. City staff would like to give council a brief update of the progress of this committee, and I'll start off with a little brief history of the committee. On September 10th of 2019, the Boulder City Council approved Resolution number 6984, which established an aquatic ad hoc committee and appointed residents to that committee. The purpose of this committee is to review alternatives regarding the repair or replacement of the municipal pool and advise the City Council of possible alternatives. There have been a total of 4 official meetings to date, and items discussed at these meetings were very interesting, included education on the history of the pool, and the previous process with SH Architecture. Financial information was provided by the Finance Department. Pool design elements and options and comparisons to similar facilities was also provided by the Public Works Department. Timelines associated with bond issues and presentations from Murtha Pools. The Southern Nevada Health District came by and gave us a nice presentation on what can we expect if we, rebuild the existing swimming pool, and our purchasing manager regarding governmental purchasing procedures. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Finance Director Diane Pelletier, who has a presentation on a possible funding source of a new aquatics facility. Diane?
Feels like I was just up here. Okay. I might cover some of what Roger said because I didn't know what he was going to say, but I'm going to go through my item. Okay. So a little background: the defeat of the original ballot question for the $40 million bond issued to finance a replacement aquatic center failed, in my opinion, not because the citizens didn't want a pool. It failed because citizens didn't want their taxes raised to pay for the pool. So finance staff has been hard at work to derive a workable plan. In addition, the pool committee was created and tasked with 2 items: lowering the pool cost and financing. So the pool committee continues to work at finding ways to cut or delay the pool construction costs. As for financing, big ticket items like purchasing a home or financing a college education requires a savings plan. You don't go out and look at houses and say, oh yeah, that's the house I want, and then say, okay, how am I going to pay for this? I got to come up with a plan. Or you don't say, I want my kid to go to Harvard, and now I got to come up with a plan to save for the next 3 years to do that. So big ticket items like a home or college education requires a savings plan. We know that a replacement aquatic center will require substantial funding. No matter how you look at it, I don't care if it's 40 million, 30 million, 20 million, that's substantial funding. Regardless, the city should not and cannot afford to wait on a final cost to start thinking of how it will pay for the big ticket item. This proposed 3-year plan, which is in this pamphlet that we put together, will start saving money now and generate approximately $24.5 million from existing sources and provide a means to repay any bond issue without impacting the property tax rate or taxpayer. So the plan has 5 key milestones. The plan does require action by the City Council and requires the voters to approve ballot questions. The plan shouldn't take more than 3 years to secure the funding. The plan has been reviewed by the city clerk, city attorney, Parks and Rec Department, city manager, Zion's Public Finance, bond counsel, and the ad hoc pool committee. The only unchecked box remains is the city council. So the plan does require action by the city council and by the voters, and the plan shouldn't take more than 3 years to secure the funding. Now I'll go through each milestone. So it's 5 milestones, but it's 3 years, just not to confuse anybody. Okay, milestone number 1, we already have. There was an initial anonymous donation previously made to the city for $1.3 million earmarked for the pool complex. That money is already in the city's general ledger, waiting to be spent for the pool. Milestone 2, and the actual ordinance. So pass an ordinance to capture excess revenues over expenditure for fiscal years 19, which is going back a year, 20, 21, and 22. That's listed in the book, the proposed ordinance wording, and actually we would probably tweak that a little bit more to make it more restrictive, but we did want to provide the language to do these things in the booklet. Milestone 3 asks voters to approve 2 ballot questions at the November 2020 election to use capital improvement funds. One is to use $7 million out of the capital improvement fund, the voter-approved fund, to use seed money, $7 million. And we had asked for $5 million in the one that was rejected last June. But this is a totally different plan, and I think it's a more structured plan, and once people understand it, they might be open to that idea. It also includes a $1 million, another question, I believe it's in the form of 2 questions, and the other question would be $1 million additional dollars each year towards the project from the capital improvement plan, voter approved, if they approve this, and $1 million after the project starts to repay any borrowed money. So milestone number 4 asks voters through a ballot question at November 2020, same election coming up this November, to reappropriate previously approved land sale proceeds of Tract 350 to be used towards the pool reconstruction. So this land sale was already previously approved, but it's been, I believe, sitting on unused for 10 years or...
The land hasn't been sold yet. So,
right, but it was approved to be sold when?
Yes, 2010.
2010, 10 years. And we just feel like that's a long time, and maybe the voters would like to reappropriate that towards the pool. Milestone number 5 is it asks voters to approve a ballot question at the June 2021 election to approve a 10-year bond issue to cover whatever balance is needed for the pool at that point. So the estimates of all those milestones. Well, the milestone 1 we already have, 1.3 million. Milestone 2 has already some of that money going back to 19. We'll end up with some, and I don't have the exact amount, but it's somewhere around $1 million. And also this year we expect and hope that we'll have excess revenues that we can allocate towards this. And same thing with 21 and 22. So conservatively, we hope to have a total of 5.8 million from this ordinance. Milestone 3, if the voters approve, would be a $7 million reduction out of the capital improvement fund to use towards the pool. So it'll be pulled out of there and put into the, I can't think of the name of the fund, but we created the fund through the pool pack. We did it last September, and we would actually do a sub account and put that money in there to be used for that. Then the 10 million from the land sales would also, if the voters approve that, once that land is sold, that would go towards this. And then the milestone number 5 would be determined based on the selected design and total amount set aside from the prior milestone. So we could have more than this, we could have a little less than this, we could have so much that we wouldn't need a bond. But at this point, milestone 5, we will know specifically what we need. So it is estimated that if the City Council approves the proposed text amendment and the voters approve the ballot questions for November 2020, that the city can generate approximately $24.5 million for the pool reconstruction. The number may be higher or lower depending upon the land sale proceeds and the amount of excess revenues over expense in 21 and 22. If a bond is necessary, because sometimes with a plan, when you show people, they start getting generous and want to be part of it. They get excited. So, we're still hoping that once the plan becomes well-known, people will say, wow, this is really cool that you're going to do this with your own money. We want to help. So I'm not ruling that out. So we may not even need a bond issue. But if a bond issue is necessary, the voters would be asked to approve a 10-year issue for the amount necessary to fill the funding gap, and that would be estimated to be about $6 million at this point. Actual construction costs will be known prior to the bond question, so voters will know exactly what is being asked and what the city has done thus far to generate funding. The bond issue, I repeat, would not require a tax increase and be similar to the private finance of the raw water line, using private placement as the instrument and not approved and voter-approved capital improvement funds for repayment, not a taxpayer-backed public bond sale. So if we put it in private placement, we don't have to do the bond council, having the GO bond backed by the taxpayer because it's being sold to the public. It would be a private placement. So this whole plan really is in the hands of the voters to decide. So my opinion is let them.
Thank you, Ms. Pelletier. As a point of order, I'm going to separate these two things as far as the ballot question and the financing in general, because our next agenda item is regarding ballot questions. So let's keep our conversation regarding the finance plan itself. And then in the next agenda item, we will discuss potential ballot questions. Mr. Luttrell.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As it's already been mentioned, two of the primary goals of the ad hoc pool committee is either A, figure out if we can repair the existing pool, or B, what it's going to cost to build a new one. In our most recent committee meeting, there were some ideas floated out there about obtaining a consultant to give us their professional opinion on what it would cost to repair the pool, and also giving us a cost estimate with that. Another idea that was floated out, which it could be the same firm, it could be a different firm, but to analyze the work that S&H Architecture has done, but go forward with other amenities in the pool. We've been discussing what the community wants for the new pool if we do go that route. We started with the community preferred pool that S&H Architecture came up with, and there's been ideas of removing different amenities from it, such as the fitness center, exercise, kitchen, lounge, even the outdoor pool, restrooms. Some of those amenities being removed just to try to bring the cost down, whether it just be bringing the cost down or if we don't even need them. So that would be the second part of it, is having a consultant come in, go through the information that S&H Architecture has already done, and then be able to provide a new estimate of exactly what we want in a new pool, if that's the route we go. Another option that has been mentioned already, we got a presentation from Mirtha Pools. It's an option that none of us had even thought about. S&H Architecture maybe they might have thought about it, but I've never heard of it before. Basically a prefabricated pool that we could get at a discount. That's always another option that we could go. We got an estimate from Mirtha Pools on what it would cost to buy the pool, but that's not the whole picture. And we still have to dig the hole, put in all the fixtures, all the other amenities with that. So those are some of the options that we've been discussing at the pool committee, and I'm here for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from council, comments?
I just have a question. So there was someone that looked at repairing the pool, and did they give an estimate, or that was just an idea?
That was an idea that was recently at the last meeting of, why don't we hire a consultant to go in and do a very detailed analysis of the existing pool and give us their professional opinion on what it would cost to repair it if it's possible. I know S&H Architecture looked into it. I can't remember the exact dollar amount that they gave us. Thinking about $12 million, but definitely don't quote me on that.
Okay. But that's a rough estimate.
Yeah. Okay. And at the same time, I don't know how much time and effort they put into analyzing everything down there.
And I just as clarification for that, that's like a 2-page summary that they did. Again, it's detailed as a summary, if that's possible to have a detailed summary.
Yeah.
But at least from what I read there, they didn't do detailed testing or things like that. They just said if you were to redo the filter system, then you're probably going to wind up having to do this. And if you do that, then you're going to wind up having to do that. And yes, as I recall in that document, they were somewhere around $12 million for that cost.
Okay.
And that did not include things like enlarging any of the locker rooms or any of that. It was pretty much to fix what was in place.
Yeah, and I don't think it included deepening the pool, because right now you can't have swim meets there because it's not deep enough. But yeah, as Mary, you were saying, I don't think it was real in depth.
Okay. So that's just actual repair. That's not making changes to it. It's just really changing the system that's working the pool right now. Yep. Okay. That gets us about halfway to the proposed money that we would get, $24 million, correct, of funding. So regardless of if it's a repair or a new thing, there would be a substantial amount of money that would be required.
Correct.
That needed these steps to be made. Okay. I don't have any more at this time.
Councilwoman Bridges?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to say that I feel like this is going in the right direction, because you used an example of buying a house, and that I wouldn't ask my children, which house should we buy, and then try to figure out how we're going to afford the big one. And so I always felt that this was trying to fund something that a bunch of people got together and thought was a great idea. So I like the idea of having to come up with a savings plan for that. Are they using sort of an assumption of 24.5 million for it? I noticed that number twice. Is that just a basic assumption of what, more or less, what that will cost in 3 years, assuming the...
Well, as chair of the committee, I just want to point out that we've not arrived at any figure. We did go back through the plans and costs that had been submitted for what was known as the community preferred pool. Mr. Luttrell had backed out the items that we took off of there, things like the outdoor, and that then when an inflation factor was added back in, left us around $30 million. But that is, again, not a cost estimate that we've arrived at. It's just a result of looking at figures that had been established for the prior pool that was not accepted by the public.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Hoskins?
Thank you. I would just like to say I did serve on this committee for a while, and then Councilman Adams wouldn't go off of it, so I couldn't be on it anymore. Anyway, I want to tell you that I am very, very happy with the staff. I think they've done such a fantastic job in figuring out a way to arrive at this, and I also am very proud of the pool committee because they have tried to find alternatives for something that I think is very valuable for our children and for our seniors. So I thank you all very much.
Councilman Adams?
As a member of that committee board, and certainly we have been interested in trying to turn every stone. We haven't quite gotten it there to that point yet, but I really do appreciate all of the work that staff has put in. I feel like we've made a lot of progress. Personally, I think a lot of the issue that came about with the failed question last time was also just the lack of trust in the community, and I really feel that the meetings we've been having have been helping. Unfortunately, they're not that well attended. However, I do keep track of the YouTube views. People are watching the videos online, which is a really important reason that we have those now, so that people can see when they're not able to be present, that they know what we're doing. They can go back and review, after this meeting. If anybody has questions, well, how did they come to that? And they can go through and they can watch that. So I think that's been a very important part. Members of the community have been coming up to me saying that they really appreciate where we're going. So I really do think that this is, we're moving in the right direction here. I think that as long as we continue down this path of being very transparent with what our goals are, how we intend to reach those goals so that we may have a new pool, I do believe that we will get there. So it might take a little bit of time, but I think this is the right way to do it.
Thank you. And Councilman Adams and I are the chair and vice chair on that committee. I believe we're at 4 meetings right now. So, we've had an opportunity to discuss a lot of things. I also want to recognize the people who are serving on the committee. We looked for a range of people on there. I think we accomplished that. We have a couple of people with backgrounds in constructing and maintaining pools. We have a couple of people in there, Sarah Carroll, former swim coach. So I think we have a good range of people to give input, but it has only been 4 meetings. These Mirtha pools, again, I've never heard of them. There was an opportunity at Mandalay Bay where there was a swim meet, an international swim meet. They had constructed 2 of those pools, and one of them was made available. I know we've got that estimate in there somewhere around $470,000. Well, I know that sounds, boy, that's a really good price. Well, it's a really good price for 3/4 of a pool because one wall was plexiglass and they weren't selling that with a pool. And of course, it didn't include any of the pad or filters or any of that stuff. But it is a very attractive option. Some of the comparisons I've seen, they're a little more expensive up front, but the long range for them, they tend to last a very long period of time. Company has an excellent reputation. So that's something we can look at. My biggest concern about where we're at in this process right now is going to the community and saying, well, here you go. We have this all figured out, because we're still, I think, some ways away from determining what we would like to see, what we're able to afford. And again, somebody had said it earlier, I think it was Mrs. Pelletier, that one of the reasons this may have failed in the last election was you never said how much money you had to spend on it. You put together a wish list for a pool and went to the community, and the community said, no, we're not interested in that. So that's going to be a big part of this, is to be able to show the community, as Councilman Adams said, to be able to show the community we're trying to be fiscally responsible. We're trying to get a facility that will benefit the community. And we're going to look for a variety of solutions. We have not even gotten to the point where we can say the pool is unrepairable. That's why I believe one of the things, and this particular item is not for possible action tonight. We're just going over the recommendations. But one of the recommendations was that we do retain a consultant. SH Architecture is no longer in business. The firm is dissolved, but apparently some of the principals of that firm are with a different firm. Is that correct?
Yeah, Knit Studios, I believe is what it was, had purchased SH Architecture.
Okay. So again, whether we would go with the same consultants or have somebody take a different look, SH Architecture has designed many pools here in Clark County. They're a well-known name for that. But that's something that we'll need to take action on at a future time, is whether we want to do that, get a consultant in, look at the suggestions that the ad hoc committee is giving so that we can come up with a fairly solid price. I mean, you're talking about millions of dollars. You're never going to get it down to the penny on estimates, and give us a determination. Can it be repaired? Is it worth repairing? So I think those are two of the biggest factors. There were some other recommendations that the committee has been discussing, but I think right now where we're at are those. And again, Councilman Adams, I'll turn it over to you if you think there's anything.
No, nothing really to add. I guess the one thing I would say that I thought was personally eye-opening and I thought very informative was the Southern Nevada Health District coming down, talking to us about what does need to come up to code based on what changes we make. So the number of bathrooms, depending on the number of people, but that might not have to change if we're just changing certain things. So it's kind of a piece by piece as we replace certain things, depending on how we are trying to update them, is what would come to. So I think we came in with a little bit of a misunderstanding, but I think we're a lot more clear now on exactly what we need, what we would have to comply with, and what we might be able to continue moving forward if we were to go for part by part. The biggest one being if we change the volume of the pool in any way, that does basically, that's when we start to get into a new pool and have to really start bringing it up to code. So that's kind of the biggest thing, but there are a lot of different areas for us to pursue, but I think that was probably the most informative for me, is understanding some of those hurdles that we will have to face when we look at repair or replace. So.
And that changed the volume of, we know, because the school district has told us, the school cannot hold swim meets there because the pool is too shallow. So the only way that it can be used for the school team is to make it deeper. And when you're talking about a great big concrete shell, that's not the easiest thing to do, to make it deeper. So, okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Again, staff and Mrs. Pelletier, I know how hard you worked on getting that financial plan together. That's certainly going to be attractive for the community that it would be done without a tax increase, but we'll move on to our next item here. for discussion of the ballot questions. Madam City Clerk, did you want to introduce this, or?
Was staff looking for a staff directive on that last one?
I don't believe it was agendized for possible action. It was a presentation.
No, it said for possible action, staff directive.
Okay, well, then we will go back to item number 8. As I had said, I think the most significant thing that came out of our last meeting was the need for a consultant. So that would be my recommendation, is if council agrees to have staff look into and provide us with pricing on what it would entail to have a consultant. And it may have to be 2 different firms, but one, a review of the repairability of the pool to determine that cost and what would be involved. And the second would be to review the recommended construction or design concepts that the committee may develop to give us a cost estimate.
And that's a motion, correct?
I will make that a motion.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any other directives then regarding the pool situation that any other council members would like to make?
I guess you essentially asked the same thing, but also for as far as the committee, if there is anything that you feel that we haven't been discussing or that you feel might be worthwhile that we haven't necessarily looked at, that might be, just to at least give us an idea to move in that direction, since we don't always get to the time to talk about it. So
you're requesting that from staff then?
Yeah, I guess I'm just also from the rest of council, just to make sure that conversation is.
Yes, again, good point. If there's anything that other council members feel the ad hoc committee should be focused on or looking at, now would be a time to speak up.
Is there any interest in looking into, well, I know CCSD doesn't have much money, but if they are interested in having that more available for the school use, to partnering as part of the reconstruction or new pool for that use?
There's something in, I think, our budget for tomorrow that talks about contributions from CCSD. We can go and try and shake the change out of the kids' pockets, but you just kind of wonder how much money they have. And I know when the Heritage Pool was built, CCSD contributed $1 million towards that construction cost. I do think that's something that down the road we can talk to the school district about. Mrs. Pelletier had talked about different financing options. I was at a meeting this morning where I'm floating the idea, because if you go to the pool, you will see one of the entities that contributed to the original pool was the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. So I think we need to get a price. Mrs. Pelletier alluded to this earlier, that if we have a cost and then we go to these other entities, they're probably going to be a lot more interested in listening to us than if we just say, give us money, we need a pool. So,
Or if you adopt the plan.
I will always have the booklet with me.
But it won't say adopted.
We can pencil that in on the front. Okay, any other suggestions or comments? Okay, we'll go ahead then, and was that clear enough for staff as far as the consultants go? All right, we'll move then to item number 9, the ballot questions.
The city council is allowed to put ballot questions on any general election ballot, regardless of if it is our election or, a state county election. The next election is November 3rd, I think, 2020. So the council does have an opportunity to place ballot questions on that ballot. ballot questions or items that need voter approval are any expenditures from our capital improvement fund. Any charter amendment requires a favorable vote at 2 consecutive elections. Any land sale of 1 acre or more, or any incurrence of debt of $1 million or more. So staff does not have any other recommendations other than what Ms. Pelletier had described earlier, which is questions for the Capital Improvement Fund, the reformulation from the land proceeds of Track 350, the one-time $7 million expenditure to go towards the pool, and then the transfer of $1 million to the fund that was created, I think it was a few months ago, that amended our financial policies. Other than those, staff doesn't have any other recommendations, but of course the council can put forth any questions they see fit. The timeline was attached. At this point, if the council did choose to move forward, the action that would be taken tonight would be to direct the city attorney to develop the question to bring back for adoption.
Could I add one thing? What I couldn't remember earlier, it was the Extraordinary Repairs Fund, and that fund could be used for a new pool or repairs. So questions, if they were on the ballot and the voters approved it, they would be put in that fund. So it would have dual purpose use.
Thank you. Just by way of clarification, you had referenced in your plan, one of the milestones is to use revenues in excess of expenditures. We can do that without a ballot question. Is that correct? We can set up the account to start funding that account now?
That could be done, but that would require an ordinance, a change in the ordinance.
Okay,
which we have the proposed
but not a
ordinance.
ballot question?
No, not a ballot question for that.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add another point of clarification. When the ballot question was approved in 2010, the way it was written is that the proceeds 10% be used for for public safety capital needs, and the remainder of the proceeds be used to pay the debt on Boulder Creek Golf Course revenue bonds. Those revenue bonds were paid in 2015 in full, I think about 10 years earlier than scheduled. And so now 90% of the proceeds are available, and that's what the financial plan proposes, is to go back to the voters for the proceeds of that land sale and use that 90% to go towards the aquatic center.
And by charter, again, since the debt that had been proposed to the voters and that the voters had agreed to has been paid off, that's no longer an encumbrance. If the sale were to proceed, then the 10% would still go to public safety capital improvements. The rest of it would go into the capital improvement fund. Is that correct? So whether we do a ballot question or not, that money is going to wind up someplace where the voters have to approve us using the money. But unless the voters approve something, that money's not going anywhere else. Is that?
I think we could use it for future debt. For general fund.
Yeah, I think it's specific about.
No, from the capital improvement fund?
The land sale proceeds. I brought that opinion to the pool committee. Okay, I brought that opinion to the pool committee after we looked at that? Yep.
We could look at that again, Mayor, but I think you're refreshing my recollection on that there was language there that didn't tie it just to the retiring of the bond for the golf course.
It's general fund debt.
Right.
Well, again, I do think that's an important distinction, because if it's not tied to that particular debt, the city has existing debt. So if the voters said that's what we want to do previously,
You would want a ballot question clarifying what they actually want to use it for, whether it's the pool or existing debt.
right, okay. Councilwoman Folda?
The wording of the ballot question was in the packet, so it just wanted to point, it said the remainder of the proceeds will first be used to pay Boulder City Golf Course revenue bonds, and any remaining proceeds to be used to pay other capital debt obligations of the city.
Well, that would seem to apply to the raw water line then, which is the only other debt that exists right now. So without a ballot question to change that, that's where that money would be going. We cannot pay that debt off early until 2022, as I recall. When we refinanced it, that prevented us from doing an early payoff until 2022.
Yes, but I do believe that, and well, I'm not an attorney, so I guess I shouldn't even say this, but I think the utility fund should not be, the general fund proceeds from the Track 350 should not be used to pay utility debt.
Well,
And I know
you know,
that's-
you can have your preference, but that doesn't appear to be what the wording is.
Okay. Well,
I understand.
Utilities are supposed to operate as businesses.
Well, but don't forget, this was 2010, so
Right, and that's
NRS 354 was still in Marilyn Kirkpatrick's mind getting ready to be evolved, so.
Yes, but the only other thing I want to add is the utilities have, right at this point, more money than the general fund. The general fund, from what I've heard since I've came here, wants a pool. And that money would really go a long way in helping that, so.
Well, it would,
I'll
but-
stop there, but.
But the law's the law, so. Okay, so try and get back on track here with the ballot questions. Again, the clarification that I was trying to make about these is the money, almost all of the money that's at question here requires a vote by the people.
Only if you're using the capital improvement fund to pay for it, or if you are incurring debt of over $1 million, so you're bonding.
Or we want to redirect the money from the land sale of Track 350. So I believe each of those circumstances requires a ballot question. Okay? Then to continue on, my issue is we have November 2020 coming up as one possible election. 7 months later, we have June of 2021, which is another general election. I don't believe that the pool committee at this point is ready to make any recommendations on the cost of this pool. My concern with going to the voters in November of this year without having a very solid plan is that it would be rejected and we would be starting over. A big part of what I heard from voters last June was, A, the scale of the project was too big, and B, that they didn't believe that the wording of it guaranteed that the money that was going to be voted on would go specifically to the pool. So I have a real concern that if we try to push any of these questions to the ballot in November without having a sufficient amount of information, there's a very real chance that the voters are going to say no. The money that we're discussing, the major part of it, there is revenue bonds that is one of the pieces of one of the milestones that you have in the plan, but the bulk of the money is going to require a vote of the people. So I do believe that we're going to be better off waiting until we get more advice. Or it's possible to say, well, we'll go ahead. I think the submission to the election department on the timeline is July. Is that correct, Madam City Clerk?
All questions, including the arguments and rebuttals, are due to the county by the third week in July.
Okay, so when do we have to have the committees for the rebuttals? Because that would be the last, well, I guess that's not the last opportunity, but what I'm looking for is what's the last opportunity to pull back the questions and not have them on the November ballot? I guess it's when you send them to the election department is when you've reached the point of no return. I mean, we can form the committees, we can have people do the pros and cons, but, you know, at the risk that those people are wasting their time. What do you believe is the point of no return on going forward with the process?
I would say that third week in July, but because their cycle is so different than ours, I know they're not printing the general election ballot in July. I know that for a fact because we sign off on those. But their timeline is way different than ours from when we can remove a name or a question from the ballot. So I can't say with certainty it's the third week, but I can find out.
Well, July 1, I mean, could we say June 30, July 1?
To pull the question off completely?
Yes.
Well, you can say what you want. I just don't know if it's true.
Okay. Well, I don't want to say something that's not true. So, again, my concern is that we're not in a position to be able to formulate ballot questions to go to the public based on the information we have now. I believe it would be better to wait that 6 months to the election of June of 2021. I think then we would have it. It's possible that over the next, say, 4 or 5 months here, we might get to that point. But I think that's pushing the deadline pretty hard. Any other questions or comments?
I just have Mayor, I just want to clarify what you're stating, that while you think that the committee will have it by July, however, you don't think tonight we should form the wording of the ballot question and concern that it might be because of changes in the decision by the ad hoc committee and then the city council.
Yeah, I don't believe we have sufficient information to word these. Again, you know, each of them requires some dollar amount to be requested from the voters, with the exception of the tract 350 that it's just asking to redirect that. Again, I don't think there's enough there right now to be able to say, yes, we're going to put these questions on the ballot.
Would it, and I see what you're saying, because I know I heard some concerns. I think the last ballot question said something about it wasn't a pool, it was a recreation facility or something like that. So there was concern that it might go to a different use. But could we get a general written question and then in the next few months be able to tweak those? I have a concern of waiting last minute to write something up.
Well, that's why I'm saying I
think
it's better to take another 6 months so that we wouldn't have to submit things until the end of this year rather than the middle of this year. Because right now, if we do something, I mean, we actually need to give direction to the city attorney tonight to start the wording on these questions. And then depending on deadlines, sometime in June potentially is the last opportunity to not hand it in to the election department, but there would still be an awful lot of work being done on forming the committees and doing all that work.
Right, and I'll verify with Joe Gloria tomorrow, and I will send a message to the council. But with respect to your statement, Councilmember Fulda, I know exactly what you're talking about and the wording on the question for the $40 million and what was considered recreational. It would not be the same because it would not go through our bond council, and Diane can speak to that.
On page 7 of the booklet has the proposed wording for the questions. Now, it's not legalese, but because it would not require a public sale, public offering, and this would be a private placement. It would not require all that wording that a lot of people didn't at the last election. So the simple wording on page 7 of the booklet of those questions, I believe, is pretty close to what the wording could be.
And I just, one more point of clarification. I think we talked about this in briefings. The capital improvement fund simply provides another payment source. So with respect to, if the voters approved it, it is permissive, not mandatory, which we've talked about. But with respect to at least the reformulating for the proceeds of the sale of Tract 350, it wouldn't matter if it was a $5 million pool or a $50 million pool. The whole purpose of the capital improvement fund is to purchase capital. Well, this is a general fund capital project, and in the general fund, you'll never charge the rates and fees to be able to have a project like this. So this would be a perfect example of what the capital improvement fund is intended for. It's a general fund capital, large capital improvement. So this just provides another source.
Certainly we can say tonight, ask the city attorney to proceed. That would be question 3 of these 3 proposed questions. I understand what Mrs. Pelletier has said about separation between the general fund and utility fund. This vote on the Tract 350 sale was in 2010. That was prior to the language identifying transfers of funds from enterprise funds, because I believe that went in 2015. Mr. Noyle probably knows it by heart because it was written for his former North Las Vegas City. And I believe it was revised in 2017 to clean up some things. But I believe we need to be careful that if the voters said to pay off other debt, that 354 was not in effect identifying these clear distinctions between enterprise and general funds, and what the interpretation would then be for that debt. When it says debt of the city, what does that mean? Mr. City Manager?
Honorable Mayor, so 354, and actually there's another section of the UNRS that talks about enterprise funds specifically. So what you're referring to is really the notion that you cannot use the enterprise funds to help supplement or to borrow without having some sort of an actual note or loan documents drawn up so that you're repaying the enterprise fund. However, NRS 354 does not limit the ability of the general fund to supplement the enterprise fund. So you have a limitation going from the enterprise fund to the general fund, but not the other way around.
Can I add a comment?
And so, hang on just a minute. So in this question, I think what we're talking about is specifically as it relates to the debt, and particularly our debt here. The remaining debt is actually an enterprise debt. It's for utility funds, an enterprise fund. Can we use general fund dollars to pay off the enterprise fund debt? The technical answer is yes, you can. If it was the other way around, the answer would be no, unless you do some sort of a loan and then run those documents through. So in terms of the question to be proposed to the community is to clarify the language that instead of using the proceeds of Tract 350 to pay off any remaining debt of the city, so it doesn't say just general fund debt, it doesn't say enterprise debt, it says fund debt of the city. Then the question that we would propose to the public would be to clarify that language to now say, instead of proposing any remaining debt, that it would now go towards this particular project.
Okay, the clarifying thing I just wanted to add was we've been doing a lot of research on this. We've been calling a lot around the state, and everybody, it gets really strange looks on their faces and says, why would the general fund ever support the utility fund? It should never, that's why
Well,
there's no,
if
that's
you
why
have a
there's.
shortfall in the utility fund, somebody's going to pay that debt, and then it's pretty sure, well, there isn't now, but to say that general funds can't be used, because I think as Mr. City Manager just said, if that enterprise fund, let's say it's any enterprise fund, if that falls into arrears, well, the general fund is going to be the next place that that money is going to come from.
Right, but I will say, we're going to have to check these microphones here. I will say, though, however, that from an accounting standpoint and also from 354, the intent of an enterprise fund is not to always run in the negative. It really is that it's supposed to be self-sustaining for the purposes of why it was established in the first place. So it should not be the intent of any municipality to have an enterprise fund that is constantly in the negative. You should be working towards making it whole and being able to provide and pay for all of the services for which the enterprise fund was developed.
And I agree. I think the question is, since the wording of 354 wasn't around when this was passed by the voters in 2010, that now relying on these distinctions between enterprise funds and general fund, the transfer of money between the two, it really doesn't hold a lot of water.
I'm confused because there would be no transfer from general fund to utility fund or utility fund to general fund. It's money from the capital improvement fund.
Which is a portion of the general fund.
No.
Yes, but the capital improvement fund has revenues from land sales of Boulder City and lease revenues for Boulder City. That is the general fund.
We have several questions on the books. The proceeds from Tract 350 is not one of them. That doesn't talk about, or you're saying that that can't be used to pay the utility fund raw water line?
Well, I believe it can, but.
Because we have several questions on that have been approved by the voters to use funds from the capital improvement fund to pay debt service on the raw water line, for the purpose of city facilities and infrastructure.
Well, I think it's the wording of the 2010 question that just says debt. It doesn't specify what the debt is. But rather than trying to solve this tonight, again, if council would like to move forward with the process, because at least for some point of time it can be pulled back, I still think that the ballot questions that are asking for money out of the capital improvement fund can certainly wait. That money's not going anywhere unless the voters approve it. But if we wanted to move forward on this ballot question regarding the proceeds from 350, I don't see a problem. Questions or comments from other members?
Mr. Mayor, I guess it's kind of this, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because are we afraid of going too soon and losing support of it from the people, or do we want to wait a little bit longer and then push us up against, the wall that is the current state of the pool? And that's kind of this balance that we have to strike. If the voters, didn't want to pay the taxes, have the potential for tax increase with the bonds and everything like that, this to me seems the natural alternative to that. So it seems that if they wouldn't want this or approve of this, then it really puts us in that spot of what can we even do with the pool. So it's kind of this thing, and I understand the concern of the cart being put before the horse, and I don't want to say, let's go ahead and move with all of them right now. Staff can start it, and then we're going to just pull it later, because I don't think that's fair to staff to move that way. But I certainly, at least considering it to go all the way into potentially June. But at the same time, I feel it might be at least appropriate right now to at least move forward at this, because it's the very preliminary work of formulating the question, so that by the time it comes to us, we can have at least had a little bit more input. We'll have had another meeting with the pool advisory committee by that point, and then start to have some of those discussions so that we can get there. And then if in the immediate future we feel that this is not appropriate, then at that time, but that's where my thought is, just because, like I said, it's this catch-22. I understand. We don't want to waste money on something that might not pass. I think that's a big concern. And when it comes to asking people for money, that's difficult. But I think moving this to me seems like the only other alternative to move forward with the pool. The big thing is, will they vote yes in a year and a half versus voting yes in close to a year?
Mayor and Council, I just want to also just mention that if the process is that, obviously, and I think the mayor is communicating that, there is a number of things that still need to materialize in terms of information to be able to ultimately come up with a general price tag and a general feel of what it is that this pool ultimately will come to be. It is going to take some time for any firm to analyze and determine whether or not the current pool can be repaired, and or any other, reviewing the information from the architects that already designed and provided those conceptual designs, go through that, update that to whatever the current pricing models suggest. What we had, what the council and the community looked at is what we call conceptual design. It is not designs that will get us closer to a definitive price that we can go out and say, actually take it out to a bid. So I'm concerned that to get to the number that perhaps maybe that we would like to see is not something that's going to happen in the next 2, 3, or 4 months. I think it's going to take some further time than that. Having said that, the flip side of this discussion is the longer we wait, the longer it's going to take to pull money together that we can't otherwise pull together. So for those particular pots of money, if you will, that the council has the option to set aside, not do with, that would be in essence a policy question that you do for now to say we will follow the plan. And for those that require a question to be approved by the voters, if you were to wait, you could, in essence, not spend the money waiting for that, but the money is now being set aside informally, if you will. The most concerning portion is really the clarifying of the sale of Track 350, because once that is sold, it does go into the Capital Improvement Fund, which is the 90% of whatever the proceeds are of that. But currently, as the mayor pointed out, is that, does that go to pay existing debt first? And we want that clarified, because I would not want the council to be put in any position that says, oh, now we have to do this based on the language from 2010. Because again, it could be potentially read that that must happen first. Don't know. We'd have to get some interpretation of that.
Councilwoman Folder.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, what of these proposed questions, there's 3 or 4 on there, for 2020 and 2021. Certain questions take 2 consecutive votes, I believe, for the charter. Are any of these questions require more than 1 consecutive election vote?
No, because these are capital improvement fund questions,
Okay.
and those only require 1 vote. The only thing that requires 2 consecutive votes is a charter amendment.
Okay. So then my next question would be, do you know, we have an election November 2020 and June 2021. What is the next election after that?
November 2022. Okay. So this election that we have in June 2021 is the last municipal election because we had done that code amendment to move to even numbered years.
Okay. So in my mind, because of these, we have the last chance of having 2 elections within 6 months of each other. That it's our best bet to have questions on those ballots that would.
Well, and that was one thing I was going to state is that it might be something to consider to break them up to see where the community's at and show, okay, this is just step 1 instead of putting all the questions on 2021 because, you know, there's that voter fatigue. And if they don't understand every single thing, it gives you an opportunity to, I think this one's kind of a no-brainer, you know, 90% of what it was intended for, that's gone. So it might be a measuring tool to see where the community's at. It's an outreach tool to say this is step 1 and this is the first, you know, expenditure that could be allowed. You know, that's something to think about. If you put them all on one ballot, it gets a little convoluted as we've seen in the past.
Right, and I understand. And we won't have, for example, the last question on that's recommended to put on 2021, you know, we don't have, that will be the exact amount or not to exceed this amount. So we don't even have that amount yet. So I understand that will need to be much later. We won't probably have that number before November.
We probably would if, let's say,
if you pull the mic towards you.
Okay. We probably would if a large amount like the land sale proceeds, if the voters approved the use of that for the pool, then we would feel like we have a commitment from the voters. And then like the cost of the pool, even if we do this revised number, will not be a firm cost. That will cost somewhere in the area of $3 to $4 million. And that would not be a wise investment without the community having voted to approve something saying they want the pool and they want to commit toward it. Then we could use money to get a firm cost number that we would use for the 2021 ballot. That would be a firm number that we would ask them to approve.
Okay, thank you. So my suggestions is question number 1 that's suggested for the 2020 ballot. It's pretty clear, set aside one-time withdrawal of $7 million from the Capital Improvement Fund. Okay, I would suggest moving forward with that one. Question number 2, annually transfer $1 million from the Capital Improvement Fund to the Pool Reserve Fund for establishing sufficient funds for construction of an aquatic center complex or debt service for the project. So the only concern, most of the capital improvement votes that we've done in the past have had a cutoff date. They have it, you'll do it for 10 years or you'll do it for 7 years. It ends at, they have an expiration date on them. You're looking at me funny, but I know that they do. Only one. Okay, so we have an annual one that goes 1 million every year till infinity, but we have a couple other that end in a certain amount of time. 1. I think there's more than 1.
Well, I think we should all keep in mind, too, there's not an unlimited amount of money that goes into the capital improvement fund. So you can vote all these $1 million transfers, and eventually you're going to run out of money.
Right.
And we may be pretty close to that point. I believe the figure is 2.2 million that goes in there each year.
As of right this moment, revenues going in there each year is at 3, it's looking like between 2.9 and 3 million. But that's just on the current leases that we have in place. So it's very conservative. And we know we have other land leases that are potentially coming up in the next 2 years.
So what are the current transfers out?
The current transfers out right now are about 3 million. Well, it's all going to the utility fund except for the 1 million for the general fund. So right now in 2020 we had 2.945 for the utilities, and 500,000 for the utilities. So that was that 3 point whatever, and $1 million to general fund. But the utility sunsets, that one of those sunsets in 22 and one of those sunsets in 23, and after that, the only slotted amount to be removed each year is $1 million. And the fund is projected to grow, quite a bit after that, because only $1 million is budgeted to be removed for the general fund expenditures.
And that, again, is permissive.
Right.
So you don't have to use that.
Don't have to.
So, then that's what my concern is. So it doesn't have an end cap. It just says sufficient funds, but that could be forever. So, I mean, just looking at a skeptic point of view, right, that we could have a sunset date, but not, because we don't know the number.
And part of the issue that we have is that, we haven't gotten to the point of getting the number of the total cost of the pool.
Right.
And the monies that are set aside, what is the gap that is needed to fill? And that gap would be filled by a potential private placement bond. And then that's what the ongoing revenues would be needed is to pay that debt service off within the 10 years that typically you get the private placement bonds for.
And so I understand that, the use of needing that. I'm just trying to say that looking at it from another point of view is that it doesn't really have a cap. Like, it could be $20 million, it could be $5 million. And so that's a big, I don't know.
This was proposed wording, so.
Right. So that's what I'm just saying
It was just something for the council to start with. And
but as I
yes, you
said,
could
as
put a
far as
sunset.
moving forward, that's something I would like to consider with that question, is what I'm trying to say.
And you're talking about that $1 million transfer each year? That wouldn't
Not
just...
the general fund one, the proposed for the pool.
Okay. I was going to say, because that one that she
No.
suggested would go to that account, and that could be used for various items.
Right. No, not the annual one that's already occurring. This is the proposed, just for the pool needs. And then with the changing of the land sale, any language in that just needs to be explained, because people need to understand that, yes, we already proved that this would go to a debt. That debt no longer exists. And so it's not creating a new, it's just moving the use to another use, and just to make that very clear.
Well, that's if
that happens.
The wording actually means that the raw water debt is magically not city debt anymore.
So that would need to be clarified in the meantime, because that would add another question correctly if we have to
And that's
clarify
what
that
this question would need to do, is to clarify that instead of using this for, the remaining city debt, it would be first allocated towards this project.
debt.
Councilwoman Bridges?
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my mind around what we're doing. I mean, I understand what we're doing, but I'm trying to figure out what action we can take to get this process started. I'm just curious, for presidential elections, what percentage of the population of Boulder City typically votes?
Very high.
80%.
Okay, so we're looking at, if we have a ballot item, we're going to have a lot of the population of Boulder City looking at that item versus June of 2021, which this last one, we had 45% approximately. So
it's double the turnout.
Double the turnout. So if we started with question 3, I mean, to me that's a concern, because what if in the next couple of months we ended up voting on selling the land, even 3 months down the road, then we're going to have to figure out how to undo something that's been done. So in order just to start with each question, is there a way what's required to start the process to start writing that ballot question in a way that exactly expresses what it is it's doing?
I think the direction from the council to the city attorney to write the question, I think he's hearing you pretty loud and clear.
Okay.
And,
Does that require a motion? Does that require?
It does.
It does.
It does.
Okay.
And let me just emphasize, because it has been somewhat said here, and I think it may have gotten lost a little bit in the discussion, but one of the things that we really want to emphasize for the council is that we want to truly get a commitment from the voters that this is what they want. Because along this process, you're going to be required to spend some substantial amount of money before you get to that final number. And it's called design. You have to design the pool, and you have to get to, I want to say 80 or 90% design plans, in essence, to be able to go out and actually do a bid, right? And during that process, that when you get to that final number, now we know, okay, this is the cost. Everything up to that point, plus now the construction costs. And then that's where you want to go to the voters. But I would not recommend to this council to go and spend $1 million or $2 million to actually do these designs, not knowing if the voters are going to even accept that. And that is really what happened with the last council as well, is we were somewhat in a pickle. That's why you had two questions, so $5 million to basically allow us to go out and start designing to get to that final number, and then the rest of the money to be able to finance that pool. Same kind of question that we have here is that because of the process that we have here in Boulder City, which is very unique, where any debt over $1 million must be approved by the voters. That is not a limitation for other boards, and they can go through the process where you go and you spend the money, you design it, and you come up with a number, and then, if you feel that there is consensus of the community to support that particular project, you move forward with the bond measure, if that's how you need to finance it, or if you happen to have enough cash on hand, you finance it or you pay for it outright. So I just want to be clear that I want to make sure that, the council understands we need to, I feel that it's very important for the council to have a level of commitment from the community before we start spending a substantial amount of money going forward in designing, and getting to that ultimate number that we need in order to go out and do a bid on a design for a pool.
So would
one or more of these questions, I think, would absolutely.
Question number 3.
Yes.
Having it worded and as it would appear on the ballot in a way that's clear about what it was or what it is that we're actually asking for.
That's what we're asking the council to do
Okay.
tonight, is give me direction on that. And that requires a motion and a vote
Okay,
by a
could I
majority.
make a motion? I would like to make a motion.
Prior to you making a motion, let's go ahead and give everyone an opportunity to have their input. Any other input?
I guess I'll just say, I think Councilwoman Folda made some good points about not having the necessarily a cap, or wanting to have some type of, we're not just going to do any amount of money for the transfer portion of it. So I think that's something that we should look at as far as language is to clarify that. Also with regards, it sounds like we definitely want to make sure that we're going to clarify the language on the approximately the 45 acres, the sale of land. So we'll want to clarify that regardless, I think, before we move forward. And then I believe the capital improvement fund, to me, that seems like a natural. That's where the money, if we don't want to raise taxes, it's going to have to come from the capital improvement fund. So I would suggest that we go ahead and move forward at this time with that direction to staff, so that they can come back to us at least with those the language, so that we can look at that, make those decisions. Then allows us for a little bit more time for community input in case they say, hey, maybe don't do that. I don't think we're ready for that. Or maybe they're saying this is, it's not going to be perfect. It's not a vote of the people. But I think if we move forward, at least then we still have that opportunity to stop by the next one if there's any question we're not comfortable with. So I'll leave it at that.
Just clarification, then you're saying you want to move forward with all 3 questions? Yes. Okay. Councilwoman Hoskins, any comments? Okay. Councilwoman Bridges, you appear to be extremely anxious to make a motion, so rather than, getting the input from the others, Mr. Adams has suggested going for all of them. If you'd like to make a motion, I guess now would be the time to do that.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that we give directive to staff to write question 1, 2, and 3. Does it need to be more specific than that? I think there's clear understanding of what it is we want written.
The $7 million, the $1 million transfer.
And the proceeds from track 350 to be directed, the 90% to be directed to the city's aquatic complex.
Did you want to include Councilwoman Folda's suggestion that there be a sunset put on that, or you just want to go ahead with your motion?
We could amend it to put a sunset.
Not really amended.
Okay,
You haven't
okay.
completed your motion yet, so.
Okay, I would add that. That would be for question 2.
Any specific time frame?
How about staff recommendation?
Pardon?
Perhaps staff can recommend the timeline since we know what the financial impacts might be.
Okay.
Keep in mind, I'll wait for a second, then I'll wait for a second.
Okay, anything else?
Nope.
Anyone wishing to make a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Did you want input prior to the vote?
I just wanted to say, for as far as the sunset goes, just remember when these resolutions are brought back, when the city attorney writes these questions, if the staff recommendation was 10 years, of course you can amend it on the floor. You can amend the resolution, you can amend the wording. It's not like in stone and, we die on it. You still have the ability to change it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank God that's over. Okay, that's the last item, brings us to our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak in public comment? Mr. Reagan, you'll have up to 5 minutes and you may speak on any issue.
Good evening. Matt Reagan. I sit on the Airport Advisory Committee, but I'm here speaking only as an individual. Back in 2011, I used to manage apartments and houses. I was doing that for a family friend whose wife had gotten ill. And every month I would do a profit and loss. And the profit and loss would be, take all the income, take all the losses. And I was collecting this data because the whole project was a mess. And so I was trying to give this data so that I could say, hey, you need to get out of this. This is a horrible investment. And subsequently, he did get out of the business. Now, fast forward, as I was, first thing I did is I got on the Airport Advisory Committee. I saw that the airport had taken over the fuel farm. I requested pretty much the exact same thing. We meet quarterly. And so I requested, okay, what is the profit losses? How much money are we making on the fuel? How much money are we losing? The thing I got, I think we're making something. And I thought that was really inadequate because I think we're making something. There's really no data that as a body that we can digest and then share with you all, so that as what is the design of the Airport Advisory Committee or any committee is to advise, and we can't advise something if we don't have the data. And so I think it's really important, and I would hope that our city manager would certainly at least give direction, or at least say, hey, we need to have we need to have a ledger. Here's our income, here's our losses, and then we can make this presentation. The contract will be up in, I think, in about another 8 months, and so certainly this is probably something that's going to be revisited. A lot of the information that I'm moving on to the cost, and we'll go on to the cost of these hangars. I think that was also discussed. Some of them are said is okay, it's very inexpensive. Now, if you take, for instance, the market rate of, let's just say, the hangars, or not only the hangars, but also the airplanes that are parked out on the ramp, they're about $50 a month, and that's that footprint. Well, most of the footprints of the hangars are really not much bigger than the ramp. And so when you really talk about the actual dirt cost, the market rate at Boulder City Airport is about $50 to park an airplane. And so then if you also compare them with, for instance, Henderson is about 88 cents a foot. Boulder City is 44 cents a foot. Now, if you compare it to other airports, for instance, in the airport that was used at the airport hangar meeting, for instance, Salem, they were at 18 cents a foot before they renegotiated the contracts, and they finished up and they're currently at 38 cents a foot. So the actual 44 cents a foot that we currently have at Boulder City is really not low. Relatively speaking, and that's also considering, you have AIP funding out at the Boulder City Airport and almost every airport. So that pays for the infrastructure. So we really cannot compare, a shed, rental shed or rental property where you're storing something in a commercial to really what storage is in an airport. It's obviously because they're heavily subsidized through the AIP funding. I did have a great conversation with Braven Dyer of FAA.gov, and he gave me a lot of information as far as, and actually confirmed the, the transition in these reversion clauses and all that. And he specifically said, and it's even on FAA.gov, as far as the great latitude you all have as far as what you can do. Really specifically, when it talks about in AIP funding and grant assurances, is that it obviously that the airport has to be sustaining. So you can't make decisions based that would put the airport at risk. Other than that, it's wide open. And so you all get that beautiful responsibility. Had a great talk with the Salem airport manager for about 45 to almost an hour. And he went through pretty much the same thing, had to go through the whole contentious meetings. And fortunately, as I was asking him, so how did it work out? And they ended up doing a 10-year extension. And with that 10-year, it was really as the city can pretty much, decide what are we going to do with these hangars in 10 years. So I said, well, how did it work afterwards? What were the relationships? And that was really the good part of it all, is they came together, they had agreements, and everybody was happy. And I hope that we can do the same here at Boulder City. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sorry I kept you up so late.
You're not the reason we're up this late. Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Bonner?
Hello, Beth Bonner-Kazmarski. I sit on the AB 73 working group with Julie, and I think there's a misunderstanding about what she was asking for in terms of Ms. Nola. All the other cities and groups have appointed an alternate so that when the city personnel person can't be there for emergency reasons, we don't lose our vote on the council and we can remain having a quorum. So I just wanted to clarify that in case there was a misunderstanding. She wasn't asking for 3 people, being 2 city and 1 citizen. It was just to have an alternate to her for when she can't make the meeting, so that we're still represented and we can still have the quorum. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mrs. Powell?
So Elizabeth Powell is my name. I wanted to thank the City Council for the vote today to rezone the Reflections Park to a government park. Ever since the community gardens were built on that site, they've been under threat of something. And most lately, the last City Council wanted to sell the whole property. So thank you for finally doing something to protect our community gardens. Knowing that hundreds of people have worked in those gardens over the last 20 years that they've been there and have put a lot of sweat, blood, and love into those gardens. and to finally have them be protected by a city council after working so many years, talking to city council members, talking to city managers, and going nowhere, and being lied to, and being stonewalled so many times. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? All right, we will go ahead and close public comment and move to council reports. Councilwoman Folda, anything to report?
Nope, I have nothing to report tonight.
No, I have nothing to report.
I was at the Convention and Visitors Authority meeting this morning. McCarran Airport has set a record for the third year in a row with over 50 million passengers. The gist of that means that Boulder City is going to get about a 4.1% bump on the room tax that we get back, so a little more in the kitty for us. Councilwoman Hoskins?
Yes, I'd like to report that I met with Gina Garcia of the One Stop Career Center at the library, and that they will be holding a workshop on February the 25th, and I'll be part of that. And then I also attended the meeting with the Workforce Connections today, and they welcomed me, and I was very excited to be on the board and trying to assist. One of my main goals I would like is to get the city businesses here to be more involved in the Workforce Connection and to try to help the business as well as the employees. So that's it.
Councilman Adams?
Yeah, I'd just like to report, I do sit on the Southern Nevada Health District Board with regards to the coronavirus outbreak. The very first one that they were concerned about did come back testing positive, or testing negative. Negative, everybody. Don't want to get that wrong. So that was good. There have been a number of self-quarantined of people who have come from China, from that region, under self-quarantine, who are not showing so far any symptoms, but they are being monitored. But so far, everything seems to be pretty okay in our neck of the woods. So that's good.
Thank you. And on that note, we are adjourned. Thank you all.